start the live recording. Good morning all. My name is Jonathan Lester. I'm the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, the General Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to you all on this scrutiny meeting being held on Wednesday, the 22nd of September 2011. Before we start, 2011, sorry, 10 years out. Well, there you go, 2021. Blimey, how time flies. That's how long I've been a councillor. Before we start, there are some procedural matters to attend to. The fire and emergency evacuation. For those present in the meeting room, in the event of fire or emergency, the alarm bell will ring continuously. You should vacate the building in an orderly manner through the nearest available exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda and other relevant information for this meeting are available for the public viewing on the Council's public website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film and photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that such persons filming or taking photographs may be aware. Okay, voting will be undertaken by a show of hands in the room. Only committee members may be allowed to vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I, when they want to participate, can I ask that they raise their hand, use the raised hand function on the Zoom within the system if they wish to contribute. To ensure those watching the live stream or the recording, can you say who you are, and I will introduce each person as they speak during the meeting. Because we have members of the public in attendance, I propose to just change the order of the agenda items so that the Home Lacey former school site is discussed first. So if that can be noted, and all members of the committee are happy that we proceed as follows, and we will do the flood priority flood repair capital item after the Home Lacey item. So we have a full contingent of councillors of the Scrutiny Committee in attendance. And can I ask officers to also confirm who is in attendance via Zoom?
Chairman, in attendance via Zoom, we have Councillor Itchener, Leader of the Council. We have Councillor Tyler, Cabinet Member. Councillor Harvey, Cabinet Member. We have Mairead Lane from the Economy and Place team, and we have Guy Goodman from the legal representative from Legal and Democratic Services.
Thank you very much. Welcome to you all, and obviously you can make your contributions throughout the meeting, so we welcome that. So we now move on to the first item of the agenda, which is apologies for absence, and we have no apologies for absence because we have full attendance at the Scrutiny Committee, and therefore no item 2, no name substitutes are required. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interests. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Summers.
I live in Home Lacey.
Yes, and you are the ward member.
I'm a ward member
for Home Lacey.
and I went to school there.
Excellent. Good bit of intelligence and knowledge there. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Any other member have any declaration of interest on any of the items under discussion? No. Okay. So item 4 of the minutes, we have to just approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of August 2021. and these are included in the agenda pages 11 to 16 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. So I move that this is a true record. All in favour? Any against? No. Okay, that's it.
Chairman, I must abstain as I wasn't there.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Again, thank you very much. Right. We now move on to agenda item 5, and we have questions from members of the public, and we have members of the public in attendance in our meeting, and they're very welcome. It's good to see you. So we have 10 questions from members of the public, and the questions and the responses have been published in a supplement to the agenda papers. I will now ask the clerk to confirm if there are any supplementary questions.
Chairman, yes, we can advise that there are 3 supplementary questions from members of the public attending the meeting. Mr. Horton, possibly Mr. Hewitt, and Mrs. Stubbings. And we have 1 question that has been sent in by email, which I will read out on behalf of the questioner, Mrs. White.
Okay. Right. So if we go through the questions, please.
Please invite the members of the public.
Yes. Yep. Mr. Horton, have you got a supplementary question?
Yes. Yes, please, Mr. Horton. Just to.
Press the button on the phone.
Thank you very much.
Want me to start with the supplementary question or the original question?
No, just the supplementary question, please.
Okay. Supplementary question is why this development has been progressed in Home Lacey, where there is a village with no.
Chairman, is the microphone on?
Oh, sorry. Can you? Yeah,
Is that
it's
better?
on.
Just go a bit closer to it. You don't need to keep pressing it when the light's on.
Thank you. Now, my supplementary question is why is this proposal being advanced when there is no amenities in the village of Home Lacey? There is no pub, there is no shop, there is no doctor's surgery, dentist, there's no social club, there's no. What we're concerned about is where the young people are going to go for this type of development. But because we are worried about the increase in crime, which has happened in other places. So that's my question.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Horton. We have cabinet members in attendance. Councillor Tyler, would you be able to respond directly to Mr. Horton's question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Tyler, Cabinet Member for Housing. Thank you, Mr. Horton, for your question, your supplementary question. This site was identified in 2019 for potential housing. It is identified in the core strategy under RA2 for proportional housing to be delivered in the area. This is a council-wide pipeline of development now coming forward. So we are exploring options now to deliver housing within the city as well as our market towns and rural areas. Because as you will know, there is a need now to deliver affordable homes for people across the county. At the moment, this has come to scrutiny to consider this proposal. It's by no means a new development. It's a option paper now to see what we can deliver. I understand there are no amenities, but we can encourage like live work units. We can encourage community building in terms of gardens and stuff, but we do need to accommodate affordable homes across the county. I do realise your concern, but it would go through the planning process and understand whether this could be developed as potential housing.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. And Mr. Horton, thank you for your supplementary. If you can return to your seat now. Thank you.
Is there anything else I can say in response to her
Not at this stage. We're at the stage where we're going through the supplementary questions.
Okay, fine. I fully respect the need of housing, that's all I was going to add,
Okay,
for affordable, but not in this location.
okay.
Thank you so
Noted.
much.
Noted.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Horton, and thank you for the response, Councillor Tyler. We have the next question is from Mrs. Wiseman, and the answer has been published. Is there a supplementary question?
There is, Chairman. I will share it on screen and read it out on behalf of the committee. So the question is, affordable homes and social housing suggest that some of the people. Affordable housing, social housing, suggests that some of the people who will be residing in these dwellings may be on a low income. Holme Lacey is a rural location. Some families may not have access to their own transport or to be able to afford public transport to access local amenities. Holme Lacey has no shop, post office, and a poor bus service. Therefore, residents may experience social isolation, which in turn could have an impact on their mental health, requiring medical intervention, which may put a further strain on an already overstretched found-home surgery. Has the council considered how living in a rural location with no amenities and poor transport links will affect new residents?
Thank you, John. Again, I think that's a question for Councillor Tyler, and to summarise the issue of social isolation in that location.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you as well for the supplementary question, Mrs. Wiseman. This is a county-wide issue with living in rural locations. There are many areas that have poor links, but we are looking to address this through our transport strategy. We need to be connecting local villages and the rest of the community. So we have to consider each application on its merit. So if like I've said previously to Mr. Houghton, this is a village that has a location for proportionate housing development and growth. So it is in our core strategy, and I have to keep emphasising that there has to be some perhaps proportional development here. So we will look at all these factors as we consider this site for development. And if it feels that there are potential conflicts here and we can't deliver it, then we will consider further options here. But at this moment in time, we have to look at the sites that have been identified that are council-owned land at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer, Councillor Tyler. The next question is from Mr. Farr. Can I confirm, is Mr. Farr present? He is. No supplementary. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Farr, for your question. Question. Yeah. Other question 4. No supplementary.
Is that Mr. No. The only supplementary questions that we've got registered, Chairman, is from Mrs. Stubbings, who is in attendance.
Okay.
And possibly Mr. Hewitt.
Okay. So the next supplementary would go to Mr. Hewitt. Mr. Hewitt, have you got a supplementary question?
I'm happy with the current response that we see. Just going over.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. And sorry, Mrs. Stubbings, it's your turn now to ask your supplementary question. Thank you.
Do I need to switch this on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I was slightly disappointed with the first response to my initial question, in that it said very little more than reiterate the decision that was made by Cabinet back in July. Rural affordable housing sites become available extremely rarely, as Councillor Tyler acknowledged just now. The Home Lacey School site is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver affordable housing while making much-needed improvements in infrastructure to mitigate the impact on the village. I'm concerned that if the site isn't developed for affordable housing, it is unlikely that other sites will be available to meet the needs of our friends and neighbours who wish to consider living in their community. With that in mind, the Council's reply refers to a pipeline of sites. If this list of sites does not include other sites in the rural Hereford housing market area, how will the Council assist local people who can't afford market prices?
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbings. That's an excellent question. And I'll put that to Councillor Tyler again. Thank you.
I find that very difficult to hear the last bit, Chair, but I think...
Yes, well, hang on a second. Can I ask Mrs. Stubbings to just repeat that last part of the question, please?
Maybe a bit close to the mic as well, Mrs. Stubbings.
Okay, how's that, Councillor Tyler?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, I'll just ask the bit that's actually a question. If the pipeline list does not include other sites in the rural Hereford housing market area, how will the Council assist local people who can't afford market prices?
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbins. From our pipeline of developments, we are considering all council land at the moment, but we are also engaging with third-party people as well, developers, because we realise that we can't deliver all our affordable homes in our pipeline of development, and we have to look at other options, and whether that is on council-owned land or third-party land. And this is why we are addressing the needs of our communities and our residents. We have an extreme shortfall of affordable homes, and they're not affordable homes for social housing, they're for people to get on the housing market. You know, we need to do shared ownership. We need to be able to give people, key workers, the options to live near close to families as well as in other rural locations. So this is why we can't just consider on our council-owned land, but our third-party land as well. So we need to address this. It's not just in the city, it's not just in market towns, it's across the county, and we have to encourage people to live together, work together, and have those links that we can be a good community throughout the county. So I do take your question on board, and we were considering that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbings, and thank you to Councillor Tyler. So there are no more questions from members of the public, but obviously the committee will have listened to the questions that have been raised, social isolation and amenities. But before we move on, we'll just go through to the next item on the agenda, which is just to note that no questions have been received from councillors. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which, as I've said, because we're rearranging the items, the running order of the items, we will now go straight on to the Home Lacey item to discuss. Can I just check with the clerk? Are we having a presentation by an officer?
No, Chairman, we're not having a presentation. If I may just update. If I may just update the attendance, though, we now have Councillor John Harrington in attendance. We have Neil Taylor as the Interim Director for Economy and Place, Nigel Thomas and Sarah Jowett, just to update the attendance virtually.
Thank you very much. Right, okay then. Well then, you've heard the members of the public's questions, and you read all of the questions that have been submitted, 10 questions on one item. Can we now go on to discuss the development proposals for Home Lacey? And I open it to the floor for councillors to discuss things. ask their questions. Councillor Durkin first, and then Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chairman. Just referring back to one of the questions answered by Councillor Tyler regarding these rural location sites, especially Home Lacey. In the planning for this, is any thought taken with regard to the provision of doctor surgeries and other social amenities, particularly in this area where Pound Hope is the next nearest one, Pound Hope Medical Surgery? Is the capacity of that surgery taken into account when doing this type of development?
Okay, I think that's a question for Councillor Tyler about facilities and amenities for existing and any new proposed residents.
Yeah, it's really a planning question, really, Chair. We have looked at the Home Lacey through the core strategy. It has been identified for a growth of proportionate housing. So that would have been considered in the process of when we looked at sites for further development. So in that regard, that would have been looked at in terms of facilities nearby. So we would have to consider all options here, and whether we know there are other areas that have limited facilities, but they are nearby. So it will be through the planning process as we determine this application.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Durkin, did you want to come back on that?
I do, thank you. I would question what you said about to the planning process. Yes, the approval of objections to the planning process, but I'm looking at what the council put forward as a proposal for planning committee or even the planning officer. You would need to be providing an idea of the social amenities you are proposing to provide, and I'm speaking specifically in rural areas, so that they can be decided by the planning committee rather than just relying on, in this case, Pound Hope Surgery, who I'm not sure whether the capacity of the patients is known. It's a concern that I think is important, as I say, especially in rural locations. What are you proposing to bring to planning with regard to the provision of social amenities?
Thank you, Councillor Durkin. Well, our pipeline of sites that we've got with the council are looking at potential further development. It will go through the planning process. We have to look at amenities as well. We have to access to jobs and everything else that comes through the planning process. We're trying to do the process at the moment to look at potential sites for further development. It doesn't mean to say that all sites can be delivered. And I have to reiterate that this is a pipeline of the development that the county looks to deliver for the county. And we have to make sure that when the site is right and there are local concerns for amenities, then we have to address that as well. But this site is a small site for 20 circa of homes. It's just an increase for homes, because there is a genuine need in Home Lacey. If there was no genuine need, and there is a genuine need across the county, we cannot deliver other amenities, but we'd have to consider the travel and distance to others, and that would have to go through all the planning process.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Durkin's got another question, but I'll come back to Councillor Durkin because Councillor Summers would like to ask a question, and there are three other members who want to get their questions in. Okay, but we'll come back to you, Councillor Durkin. Councillor Summers.
Number one is, can I find out why Mr. Barton is not attending?
Say again, sorry.
Mr. Barton. Let's know why Mr. Barton, the interim director, is not attending this meeting, as he's new, and I think he's the one that needs to listen to this information. That's number one. Number two, this was started in 2017, so there's been quite a bit of time lapse in between. Also, Keith must have put some figures together, because when I spoke to Richard Gabb a year ago, maybe almost 2 years ago, they were considering the homes, and he showed me pictures of what they were thinking about. So it did go quite a bit further. Now, Mr. Thornton seems to believe this was Robert Owen's school. It wasn't. It was a home Macy school, and I did tell him that. It's been very difficult to get meetings with him. He suggested that he'll meet anytime, but he's never given me a date. And he knows very little bit home racing. I think it would have been better if he'd actually contacted me and learned a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, before we, thank you, Councillor Summers, we'll come back to you. Before we go to Councillor Bowes and then Councillor Stark, I think Neil Taylor has got his hand up, and also Councillor Tyler. Sorry. Mr. Taylor, did you want to come in?
I did, but it's the reason for putting my hand up is has probably passed, in that there is a rigorous planning process for us to get through, and all aspects of the capacity of local amenities will be scrutinised by planning officers and the planning committee during that, and there will be public consultation. So it's quite a rigorous process, and I'm confident in that. And I'd just like to say that Rob Barton's not here today. He doesn't work full time, and he's otherwise engaged today.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Councillor Tyler, sorry, you wanted to come in as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just to reiterate what Neil Taylor just said, and I can't emphasise enough, it will go through the rigorous planning process for this development on the site if it's put forward. Thank you.
Thank you. On that particular point, before I go to Councillor Bowes, Mr. Taylor's point about a rigorous planning process, was there any detail with regards to the impact on amenities or the lack of amenities that was flagged up in the pre-app advice?
Sorry, do you want me to come back on that? Oh.
Yes, Mr. Taylor, yes, if you're able to answer.
Nigel's here. I don't know whether you've got, can you pick that one up, Nigel?
Yes, of course. So in terms of the pre-app advice, we have no mention in there of amenities, but clearly we're at a very early stage of this proposed development. The next stage is to explore the detailed site surveys, including all the requirements of highways, facilities, etc., and then produce the design. So the answer at this stage is we've not looked at them because we're simply not that far progressed with our proposals to date.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you, that helps. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify from my perspective, the point of this meeting is to look at the options, we're not at a planning stage. So I'd like to ask the Cabinet member to confirm the difference between social housing and affordable housing, please, because I think Mrs. Wiseman made in one of her questions, supplementary questions, talking about low-income dwellings. And it's my understanding that affordable homes are for people to get on the property ladder, local people. So I just think it would be useful for my benefit if you could just clarify the difference between social housing and affordable housing. I do have some other questions as well.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bowes. Yes, it's the affordable housing is identified in the National Planning Policy Framework, which you can find under Annex 2. And that basically says that it's got to be housing for sale or rent for those who needs are not met by the market. And that includes like housing that is subsidised through different ownership. So that could be shared ownership and obviously affordable rent. In terms of the social housing, that is also that's delivered by either local authorities or other organisations, and that in particular Herefordshire has got Connexus. That's where our housing stock was transferred to, and that is for generally for people who live on low incomes. And so it's like a social rent, which is decided by I've been informed it's the National Rent Officer that defines the rents for our area.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tyler. Did you have a follow-up question?
So are we able to specify who can purchase these homes? I know we're at a very early stage, but are we able to say as part of this, the planning process, that it must be people who are from the local area, who are key workers, etc., etc.? I just want a clarification on that. So it doesn't mean that anybody from anywhere could buy these homes or part buy them. It would be for local residents who would get the option first.
Yes, well, each site will be considered on its own merit as an understanding of the core strategy planning policies for housing. The housing market area needs assessment identifies households living in the parishes and surrounding parishes. So if, like, we are trying to build our own local properties, there would be in the planning process a planning condition imposed to specify those in housing need with a local connection in the first instance. So say if your mother or father lived in a particular area, you would be looked at as local need or working nearby. And then if you can't accommodate them in that parish, we could cascade into adjoining parishes. Now, if it's a developer that brings in the development, we have a condition through the Section 106 agreements where we will stipulate that these properties would be considered for local need, and that we would go through the same process in the planning.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tyler. Before we move to Councillor Stark, Councillor Harvey, you had your hand up. It may be a point that was raised some time ago, but please feel free to move back to whatever item you wanted to raise.
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. I guess it's an amalgam of points, really. I'd really like the committee to be clear that what we're talking about here is a part of the development process that is normally undertaken by the landowner. We are not at pre-application advice stage. We are not taking this through the planning process. This site is owned by the council. The council is the landowner, and any landowner who is looking at developing a property that they own will be looking at the viability of that development, looking at what the implications would be in terms of having to deliver planning gain, various different contributions to community facilities and local infrastructure in order to mitigate the effects of any proposed development. And that is the place that this council is in considering this as a site for development. So please don't think that this is going through the planning process. It is not. There is no pre-application advice stage that's even been reached. The decision that was made by Cabinet in July was to commence some design studies. And at the point that those design studies and this scrutiny item is, has been put on the agenda for this committee before those design activities have even begun to be undertaken. So really what you're doing is you're scrutinising the suggestion that we might even consider developing this piece of council-owned land to bring forward affordable homes for people living in a semi-rural part of the county, homes that are needed and are very difficult to achieve. So that's the point that we're at. As Councillor Tyler has said, community consultation will be undertaken at all the usual points through the planning process. And in addition to that, during the design options phase that the Cabinet took the decision on back in July, which is yet to commence. So please, can we not get the cart before the horse on this and be absolutely clear about where we're sitting in the process on this, so that, scrutiny can provide us with, useful suggestions and input appropriate to where we are now.
Yes, thank you for the clarification, Councillor Harvey. Sorry, you said that pre-application advice hadn't been sought.
Well, pre-application advice is part of the planning process, and we're not.
Yes, sorry, you said that it hadn't been sought. Is that what you said? Sorry.
Well, that we're not in the planning process yet.
No. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, as I understand it correctly, you said that pre-application advice had not been sought. Is that what you said? Sorry.
We're not in the planning process. Pre-application advice is part of the planning process. We've been looking at a number of sites owned by the county, as Scrutiny is well aware, because you've looked at the portfolio of those sites in a previous meeting, and this was one of those sites.
Yes, but just for the public record, I think you said that pre-application advice had not been sought when clearly it has already been sought on this site. And so I just wanted
17th of January 19.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make clear to what, pre-application advice has been sought, and on paragraph 9 it says that as a result the proposal was amended to reduce the density to around 20 dwellings. So some work has been done, but I take your point that it's very important not to confuse preamble and discussions about disposal with an actual full-blown planning application, which is a separate thing entirely, which is what Councillor Bowes was making the distinction between. So, Councillor Tyler, sorry, you wanted to come back.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is a lot of cross communication here. We had there was a instigation of looking at the Home Lacey site back in 2017 going forward, and that was what Councillor Summers has brought up. That was done by Keep Moat. There was an investigation of the site, and it recommended only around 21 houses could be accommodated on this. That was all that was done in that process. We are now looking at our pipeline of sites that are owned by council. So there has been no pre-app advice here on the Home Lacey site. We have identified the site for potential development. It then goes through the rigorous planning process of pre-app, consultation with the community, engagement with the parish council, and it goes through the planning process. So it has been looked at previously, but that is a separate application. That's a separate process. This is a new process now, looking at Home Lacey again through the pipeline of development.
Sorry, Councillor Tyler, can I refer you to paragraph 9 of the agenda item? It says, on completion of pre-application planning advice, the proposal was amended to reduce the density to circa 20 dwellings, providing 100% mixed affordable housing scheme. So I just want to clarify the point that pre-app advice has been sought.
In the table, 17th of January 19.
Yes, Councillor Tyler.
Yes, it was sought for that proposal, which was undertaken by Keep Moat. This is a new proposal going forward for the pipeline of housing for county. The previous application or pre-app has been done. We will consider those options, that information that's been put forward, but we have to go through our own process now with the pipeline of development coming forward. So this is the site again that is council owned. So we will consider what are the potential to put how many houses on here, affordable units, or whether we sell the land and cross subsidise across to other pipeline. So this is a new proposal. This is a new element here. We have had that before. It has, as I've already said, it's an RA2 site. It looks at proportionate growth in Home Lacey, which can be accommodated. So this is a new proposal.
Yes, I fully appreciate that, and I think the committee knows that. I just think there was just a little bit of confusion because it sounded like it was insinuated that no pre-app advice had been done on the site when clearly there had been. Okay, but thank you for that clarification. And I know from what you're saying, you're looking at this matter afresh, so we take that point on board. Councillor Stark, and then Councillor Wilding, and then we'll go back to Councillor Bowes and Councillor Summers. Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to lose the general point that's been raised about looking at the impact on infrastructure of housing development across the county. It doesn't just apply to rural areas. In my area in Ross, we have been lumbered with over 400 houses, and I'm still not convinced that they looked at the impact on our doctor surgeries, on the infrastructure in the town centre and various other matters. You may actually say the planning process is rigorous, Chair, but there's a lot of residents in Ross just do not believe it. And I do think there is an issue here generally for this committee, not just around this site itself, but around all the development that is going on across the county, and whether enough consideration has been given to the impact on local residences, on the amenities that are there. We've only got 2 doctor surgeries in Ross, and on the infrastructure generally, and I'm just not convinced there is. And that means, Chair, that I think we should be looking at a recommendation at least to have some sort of review of the planning process to see whether it is actually taking proper account of those very important issues that have been raised, not only in this particular meeting by Home to Lacey residents, but are raised by me every day in Ross.
Okay, so there's our first soundings of the recommendation. So please bear that in mind. And, Councillor Stark will be working on his wording as we speak. Okay, but bear that in mind, and it's a very important point about impact on existing services. Councillor Tyler, you had your hand up. Would you like to come in at this stage?
Yes, thank you, Chair. With the planning process, we have to consult various consultees, and that we do that. We look at all the areas, and we would consider open space. We consider the impact on schools. We consider out for library services and doctor surgeries, and we will get that professional information that's already there in the planning process. So we have to go out to consultees to get that information back. So even though Councillor Stark is very worried about the impact on amenities, that is also carefully considered through the planning process as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. I'm also interested in looking at this in a wider way, a bit like Councillor Stark did, because it's obvious that the main concern from local residents focuses on the lack of local amenities. Given that this could be affordable houses in a rural location, where is the new infrastructure that those residents, those new future residents will need? This issue comes up all the time in planning. I am a member of the planning committee, and we're always, virtually every application that comes in, we're going, there's no infrastructure to support the people that are going to be living here. There's no village, there's no pub, there's no bus service, there's no this, there's no that. We make all these points, and yet virtually every application gets passed because the rules for planning are set not in Herefordshire, they're set by main government. And we talk about it all the time in planning, and we get nowhere virtually. What needs to be done is the planning rules to be changed at the top. Now, this is part of what, I mean, the council are doing a fantastic thing with affordable housing. They're wanting to develop new affordable housing, and they're wanting to make this of the highest standard and the highest levels in terms of passive house design to address the climate and ecological emergency. So I'm totally behind that. I totally agree with it. But I do think this all boils down to the fact that there isn't enough mention of what infrastructure is going to be placed amongst these houses. I hear it said a couple of times, this development is going to have 21 houses, 20 houses, something like that. Well, I think you should have 10 houses
and it should have a medical centre next to them. You know, I know that might make it unaffordable for the council, but that's the sort of thing that local people will want to see. If you're going to build some houses, put in some actual infrastructure instead of saying that it's all going to happen in the planning process, because as far as I can see, in 2 years on the planning committee, that's a waste of time. It just doesn't happen. So what I'd like to see is some commitment from the council that they will, that when they're designing these places and they're doing these affordable houses to sort of be a light beacon to show developers how they should develop, then they include some of that new infrastructure in, so that is part of the vision. Louis just mentioned St Mary's Village in a roundabout way. Yes. You know, 400 houses. The only thing that seems to be being provided in all those houses is a new McDonald's. There's no medical centre for all the people that eat all those burgers and get heart disease. There's, you know, there's a little bit of green space, but there's no real cycle provision. There's no real travel provision. It's just absolutely useless. So those developers absolutely need a light shining on how development should be made. So I don't criticise the council for wanting to put up these affordable houses. I think it's fantastic, and I want to see them at the highest design levels. But I do think we need to make it much more plain that we want more infrastructure. Thanks.
So, Councillor Wilding, are you mindful to put forward a recommendation?
Yes.
With that type of...
providing infrastructure must be included in.
I've just sent something on it.
Yeah.
We can consider. I'll send something to John. John, you've got it.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. I will make sure I have.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Wilding. Before we go to Councillor Summers, Councillor Harvey would like to come in. She's got her hand up virtually.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As the Cabinet Member for Planning as well as Finance, I'd just like to say that I would welcome any comments the committee would like to make about how to improve the assessment of current community infrastructure and the sorts of infrastructure that may need to come forward in the future for sustainable development in and across the county. We are in the process at the moment of doing an update of the core strategy, and I sense and share the frustration felt by members who are also members of the planning committee that we are constrained in some senses by the analysis that has been undertaken for the core strategy as it exists at the moment, that creates the planning policy framework in which we currently take our decisions. It's important that we get community infrastructure right, and also that we are, when we're planning on 20 or 30 year timescales, that we actually get right what community infrastructure will need to be in 20 or 30 years time, so that we're not creating an assessment framework which is always looking backwards rather than forwards. So it is part of the planning process at the moment. The heads of terms information that goes forward with every planning application to the committee indicates clearly what the contributions are that are made to local transport, to open green space, to the library service, to schools, to the Wye Valley Trust Hospital, and to the clinical commissioning group for improvements to the GP funded services that they're responsible for commissioning. And those payments are all set out in the planning documentation and are all available along with the comments of those organisations as statutory consultees on the website associated with each individual planning application. So any member or member of the public who needs to be assured as to what the consideration is that's been given need only go to the website and actually have a look through the document record that's there associated with each planning application. And then for those outside bodies, particularly the health service ones, it is their responsibility to actually be planning to bring forward the improvements in their infrastructure to meet the needs of the people who will inhabit those homes as they're built. And they are provided with funding by the developer in order to be able to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey, for that contribution. Councillor Stark, you wanted to come
Yes,
in at that point.
I didn't want to let the comment on heads of terms go by. I'm not an expert in planning. I'm sure some of you are more of an expert than me. I think the developer has too much say in what is actually given as contributions to the local community. If they can argue that their development does not directly impact on a particular activity, then you often find that in the negotiations that go on, that contribution doesn't materialise. For example, and I'll go back to Ross, and I know we're talking about Homes Lacey today, but Ross has had its youth services decimated, totally decimated over the last few years. And can we get any discussions going on the S106 contributions on youth services? No, because you've got to show a direct impact from the development to actually the provision of youth services. And Ross, that's my understanding, Chair. So I think that's a flawed system as well. And I think that, I don't want to say it's another recommendation, but perhaps it is, that I don't think local communities have enough say in what they should be able to get from contributions from developments. That would be my view, Chair.
Sounds like an important recommendation to me. Right, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as I can recall, you only get Section 106 monies on any development of over 10 houses.
Yes.
11 houses and more, you get 106. Below that, you get absolutely nothing. So it's not surprising that developers, on the whole, make their developments of 9 or 10 houses maximum. And it'd be very interesting to go back to the original government's position some time ago, that 5 houses and above affected 106 at the very least. And all we went to sell.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. I have a hand up from Councillor Davis. Would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As tenuous link, I am Cabinet Member for Assets, and this is all to do with the use of council assets. And it was just a clarification on 2 things. One was around the there's a couple of times that an assumption has been made around people who are going for affordable housing. For clarification, that does not mean that they're on low income. It means that they are unable to get a deposit. They're unable to live in the area in which they grew up. That does not mean that they cannot afford to live in the area. It doesn't mean that they aren't affluent. It just means that they haven't got that disposable amount of money, and that is compounded by the price of rental within our county, which means all of the money is going on rental and they're unable to save. So just to make that really important clarification there, because it's been said a few times. And the other one was just around the infrastructure elements of it. So I'm engaging with lots of different organisations with regards to council assets and talk community. And the way that the National Health Service, the way the GP surgeries are going, are that actually the GP surgery is the last place that you should be ending up. It should be that we're doing preventative work. That means that people are accessing the right services at the right time, at the right place. And part of that involves moving towards intergenerational living. It's the one factor that we know, if we get it right, it has such positive impacts on social isolation. It enables an older generation to work with the younger generation, and what one has, the other doesn't, and it allows them to work together. So just to make it clear that it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to have a GP surgery next door to it. What it means is, how can we work with talk communities? How can we make sure that we've got the right services in the right area for those people to use? So it's just those 2 clarifications, and I will shut up until Maylord Orchards, I promise.
Okay, Councillor Davis, I think that your point about the affordable housing was a really good point to make, and the clarification is that people have incomes, but if they're all swallowed up with paying rent, then it's very difficult to get a deposit on a house. And I think that's a very important point to highlight and to say that it is a problem for people trying to buy their first home. Absolutely. Councillor Durkin wants to come in next.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that. Yeah, I entirely agree with intergenerational living, but it still comes down to all these people living together are still going to need a doctor at some time in their life. So it needs to have appropriateness of locations, services, and other social amenities. What I'm looking at perhaps is another recommendation relating to what Councillor Stark was saying earlier, but more appropriate to this subject matter we're discussing today. I've got some words here that any Herefordshire Council pipeline or other owned land going for housing consideration as part of viability, that social amenities are included or considered as part of the process of viability. We have to set an example. And if we are the land owners, what we propose will then go to planning. And it will take out some of what Councillor Wiley was saying, that when we get, as in Ross, 400 houses with no additional amenities, it's something that we can say is being considered. And if there's a refusal, what is that reason for that refusal? So that's potentially a consideration of the proposal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Durkin. Thank you. And that's been noted by officers. Okay, right. Any further comments? Councillor Summers.
I just want to go back to what I feel is the reason, partial reason for this, is lack of communication. It's a lack of communication. Now, this has been going on since 2017. At that time, they were taking the school part off that site. There was it took a while to get a meeting with the Visitor Parish Council and talk to the residents. That was done. Now, the biggest problem I've had all along, again, is communications. There were people going on the site. I wasn't told ahead of time. When at one time, I was being called by residents. At one time, I called officers, and one officer didn't know what another officer was doing. They didn't know there was anybody on there. So there's obviously a communication problem. We still have a communication problem because I heard, and I did question it at a public meeting with Mr. Barton when he mentioned 30 to 40 homes on that. And I said that would be, if we recently talked about 25 or 26, and it was brought down to 21. So, and then an email came out to that effect. So there's no communication. If he communicated with me, we could have sat down and gone through all this as a ward member. It didn't happen. And the last meeting that I had was with Councillor Tyler and forget who it was now, anyone, the officer, and we discussed this. One of the reasons that we didn't have 25 homes at that time was because I was concerned about the drainage. They were going to drain it back into the old railway line, which I wasn't happy about. So as an email from Hayley Crane, please rest assured nothing has happened with Home Lacey since we last spoke. Unfortunately, with all services being redirected to cope with COVID, Home Lacey has to take a back seat for a while. I actually have a meeting this afternoon to discuss a way forward with the site, especially as you gave me the extra info about not supporting drainage off-site down the embankment. So this alters the picture dramatically. At that time, Keepmo came back and said, well, we can't build 25 homes. It's not financially possible, and 20 homes doesn't pay. That was the last email that I've got from about Home Lacey School, and that was from Hayley Crane. A couple of times, parish councils come to me and asked what's going on. And they've also asked, I think it was Hayley Crane, and there was a reply back to them stating that the board member knew everything that was going on, and that was it. Well, I didn't. So again, it's just very sporadic. Now, the only way I found out that this was going forward again was that it was going to cabinet. That's how I heard about it. That's why I started following up again. So we've had incidents where there's people on the land, and I've had to call to find out, and this is ongoing. So yeah, there's a definite lack of communication. I'm not sure if other board members are going through the same thing, but it's to the point. If this had been constant communication with the board member, we wouldn't have got to this stage right now. Because basically, we're trying to find out what's going on. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Summers, thank you. So we've got cabinet members in attendance. The member of scrutiny, who just coincidentally happens to be the ward councillor where this development, the housing proposal is. Any comment from cabinet members to reflect on whether they think that there's been adequate engagement with the ward member and members of the public? Councillor Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We had to, I've understand Councillor Summers' concerns and the lack of some of the engagement that has happened. The 2017 on process for keep mode, I was not part of, and I didn't know what was going on there. I sort of picked this up with Councillor Summers back in 2020 when I became cabinet member for housing. It's very difficult to keep everybody in the loop as we progress with different things. There was a bit of a timeline delay in terms of our pipeline of housing. So we've only really started since the end of last year, November time, when we started going through the process at Cabinet. We have looked at the pipeline. We are still looking, but we keep stating that we will be involving every member, Cabinet, any member whose wards are affected, that we will keep them as much as possible engaged with the process. And that's not just with the member, this will be with the parish council, this will be consultation with the community. And we need to understand the community needs. So, you know, I apologise, the appendix is Appendix 1 of all the correspondence happened between ourselves and Councillor Summers. And I do hope that we can move forward now with some comprehensive negotiations and discussions that we can sort of consider the possible site being developed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful. Councillor Summers, did you want to come back on that point?
I get this answer quite often that we're going to communicate with you after the fact, after I've complained enough times. So finally somebody tells me they're going to start communicating. I hope that's true. I still haven't had a meeting with Mr. Barton. He suggested he would have a meeting. He hasn't given me the time yet. I'm not sure how much he knows about Home Lacey. As the ward member and lived there since 1956, I would have thought my experience would be beneficial. It seems not. I still haven't, you know, since the cabinet, I went to cabinet, I still haven't heard from anyone in that area, except for Councillor Tyler, which I'm very happy about. Actually, she does talk to me about it, but that's it. Sorry.
Okay, and Councillor Tyler, I just reflecting on the position that Councillor Summers is in. If officers are going to the site and being visible, and obviously members of the public have loads of questions, but then if the ward member doesn't know what those officers are doing, and then the ward members asked about that, it does, I would, you know, just from my own experience, it does seem to be putting the ward member in a difficult position if they don't know, you know, who's doing what on a presumably very visible site. So I can see the level of engagement in the agenda, in the items, the level of engagement, and as you can hear, Councillor Summers has said that you've been very helpful in engaging with him. But I think perhaps a lesson may be learned that unless there's a regular update for the member, they can be caught on the hop if certain things are happening without them knowing, if you see what I mean.
Yes, Chair, I'll take that comment on board. I will liaise with the project management team about this, and as we progress our developments through the pipeline, we will make sure that members are adequately updated as we progress this our delivery.
Thank you, and probably from the chair, I would put a recommendation that in the project management there are clear signposts as to when members are notified rather than it be on an ad hoc basis. Otherwise, there's the danger that the ward member on any of these housing development sites that are being looked at, it may get missed, and that doesn't benefit anyone, I don't think. Councillor Summers.
Yes. Even by what I'm reading, it's kind of suggests that we brought into it when all the dealing is done, rather than before the dealing is done. We're not making deals, but it would be good to be involved in what's happening, not being told we've done this, what do you agree with or not? You know what I mean? Because same as parish councils, they have knowledge that could be used, and we're not taking advantage of that. The parish council, biggest complaint I've got about parish councils have is the lack of communication with them, because they know their areas and they're not being asked. So please, let's do it before, not after them. So if you're coming to a place where you might be making decisions, please involve the board member. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. And Councillor Bowes, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. Several points. I would agree with Louis about local communities don't have enough say in what happens within their area. I think that's a really good point, and definitely concur with that. Community assets, I agree that we do need to look at that, but we also need to be aware that a lot of those community assets have to be run by volunteers or some paid workers, and there is a shortage of volunteers across the country and the county at the moment for people who want to get involved in helping communities. So it's okay having the centre there, but we also have to look at how do we get people to man those centres and volunteer in those centres, because otherwise they will shut. And we have similar issues ourselves in Belmont where we need youth clubs and things, and it's finding the volunteers to do it. So the building is there, but it's having the staff. I would agree with Councillor Davis about deposits on houses. I was someone who got to the housing market very late in life, and I considered that I had two very good jobs, but I struggled because I rented and couldn't afford a deposit on a home. So I'm fully supportive of the fact that we need to get affordable homes for local people. That's a definite. I agree in general about notification and communication with members. I don't think it's just to do with this. I think generally members are told things at the last minute, and I don't think that's just a recent thing. When the proposed bypass was being built, I was the ward member and didn't get any communications then either. So I think that's an ongoing issue that's been going on for years, and we do need to tackle it. But my one comment would be, the report says about the highest standard of affordable homes, and I just wanted a bit of information really on what that was, so that people can be reassured that, I do think, as Councillor Wilding said, we do need to be a beacon, and so I'd just like a bit more information on that, please.
Okay, so we need an answer to Councillor Bowes' direct question, but Mr. Taylor, you've got your hand up virtually.
I have got my hand up virtually. Sorry, I wanted to come back on a different point, actually, in terms of people visiting the site at Home Lacey. I'd just like to remind members that whilst this is under consideration for development, it remains a piece of council property. Property officers visit, contractors visit, security has to be taken care of, and we would not normally contact the local member every time we visit a piece of our property. If we do want to do that, that would be a whole process that we would have to put in place at a cost to advise local ward members every time we visit a property for any reason. So we could restrict that, if we could restrict that request to the project team rather than any visit, that would really help.
Okay, thank you for flagging up that point. Councillor Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to answer Councillor Bowes' question. I'm not sure if Councillor Liz Harvey was first.
Councillor Harvey, did you want to come in, or?
Well, I was just going to say that at Cabinet last week we approved a improved building standards for housing that we were going to be building, or in not just housing, but any building that the council was going to undertake. So those higher level building standards are all outlined in that decision that was taken last Thursday and is in the public domain.
Yes, thank you for that. And that was the item about passive housing, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Tyler.
Yes, that's what Councillor Harvey said. It was our Heritage Future Homes that was approved last week at Cabinet. In terms of the highest standard, we will be looking to develop at least the passive standard for homes in our county. In terms of that, that's meeting our zero carbon targets by reducing that to 2030, which is our council's aims in the next 7 years or so. But the term of passive housing means how that building is constructed. So we would have to look at its solar orientation. We would consider solar panels, and the fact that the gas central heating is being sort of through building regs now is going to look differently. So we have to look at our ways of heating the home differently. So that could be air source heat pumps, that could be ground source heat pumps as well. But it's not just only that, it's how the building is constructed. So we have to make sure that our developers and local builders are sourcing materials locally, and the building is being constructed so tight that there's no emissions coming from the home. So basically it reduces our heat escape. It helps with poverty, fuel poverty in the county, which is quite high at the moment, but it also gives the sense of human health and well-being, because the home will be warmer, it will have the longevity of it. And we will build communities that can be part of everybody together, that's growing their own food, having car clubs, having electric charging points. We have to drive this new development going forward for Herefordshire. And we really do hope that developers will be on board with us as we move through to meeting our zero negative emissions, because it's so important now that we address this situation quickly and be that lead in exemplar housing for Herefordshire.
Okay, thank you. Right, if we just pause for reflection now, because we've got some recommendations. Has anybody else got a Councillor Stark?
Sorry, Chair, I've gone back to what we've been instructed to do today, Chair. I don't think we're doing it in its entirety. The committee reviews the future development options of the former Old Primary School, Home Lacey, and determines any recommendation it wishes to make to the executive which may enhance the effectiveness of the plans. Well, Chair, we haven't discussed the offloading of the site to a private developer, which is one of the options. I do think we have to discuss that as well today, as part of what we've been instructed to do. I don't know if we have, Councillor Dirk, and that's the problem. Sorry, but it's part of our instructions was to look at that.
I will make it so people can hear me.
Yep.
Do we have any information on that proposal in this package? Is my question.
Okay, there's a question from two members of the committee. The option of selling the plot of land on the open market, maximise its value to Herefordshire Council. What information can be put forward so that this committee can assess whether that should be an option instead of the council using it for its own purposes?
Oh, and just a comment, Chair. Affordable housing shouldn't just be about the price that you pay for the house. It should be affordable to live in as well. Because with this spike in natural gas prices, some people are facing an increasing problem about whether they can even live in the house that they bought. So, I mean, the whole area of affordable housing does need to be looked at in the right sense as well.
Yes, the running costs are just as important as the affordability of the place in the first place. Yes, right. We had an officer put hand up. Sorry, Nigel Thomas. Did you have your hand up to answer the question about, or is it Mr. Taylor? Sorry, the direct question about selling it on the open market.
So, Chair, I'm happy to answer
Nigel.
the question. The answer at this stage is we are at very early stages of the development. open market sale is an option, but until we've done all the work on the surveys, the design and the financial viability assessments, we do not have an answer as to which option will proceed.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Taylor, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, it was just on the affordability and running costs of these homes. The environmental building standards have been referred to, that the council has now adopted. You know, that is what it's all about. It's about using less energy. It's about designing passive house so that the house can cool itself, it can warm itself, it's heavily insulated. That's what the building standards are all about, saving energy and thereby saving cost.
Thank you. Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that response regarding selling on the open market. My question is, when is that information likely to be coming through for scrutiny? And should we not be considering it as part of the overall package of council development and others developments under one meeting, so we get an overall decision? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Sorry, yeah, we're at far too early a stage to put that together. The idea is that we put a scheme together that stacks up financially, that adopts all our building standards and produces some nice, affordable homes. If that doesn't happen, if that doesn't stack up, then there'll have to be an alternative strategy. We're not just going to keep the site forever. We'll need to dispose of it if we can't make it work.
Councillor Durkin, you want to come back?
Thank you. So bearing in mind what you said, this should be coming back to this committee when the other work that is outstanding at the moment has been completed. And in the interim, my question is, what do we do with the decisions we're making today related to this specific site? If we're looking at only at one element of a possibility or two possibilities, how can we make an informed decision?
It's a good question, Councillor Durkin. Councillor Summers.
I'm going back to keep mode. The initial output of the work from keep mode indicated the potential for the site to deliver development of 26 homes. That would say to me that there's information out there that some of it you're going to be doing twice over, or repeating. Yeah. You're going to be repeating, and I don't understand that. I'm not sure what the cost involved is, but it's substantial. We can't afford it, to be quite frank. The other thing is, there's been a lot of questions about infrastructure. Now, we have an old schoolhouse that goes back to 1860 that would be useful for infrastructure, maybe a village store or something of that nature. That needs to be considered also in your when you're looking at what you're doing next. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
So on that point, Councillor Summers, would it be that there should be a recommendation to say that the school building could be used as a community asset in the disposal? I can think of developments in the ward I represent where planning application for housing is being proposed with the building of a shop. Yeah. And that's part of the package. Whereas this could be a proposal that develops houses and gives the school building as a community asset or a surgery, a hub for talk communities or something like that. And perhaps that should be one of the recommendations. But I mean, just to tease out the point though, is that it sounds like we're in a position where we're only able to give part of our recommendation because we're not in a position to assess the merits of an alternative scheme, which would be larger homes on the open market, which then could fund affordable homes in a more sustainable location.
And it's mentioned in the paper that there's an alternative.
Yes. So recommendation therefore would be something along the lines of the executive provide information further information to this scrutiny committee so that they can assess the viability and the prospects of selling the property, selling the land for housing on the open market. Councillor Stark.
Yeah. Members may not be aware, but there is a possibility of a pilot on design, which is not just about the design of the house, but the whole package, where it sits, the impact on the community and everything else of development. Ross has been asked to take part in that, as has Weston. We're still at early stages yet, but that's what's missing here. What's missing here throughout the counties, we get these developments put down in isolation. They're not put down and incorporated within the community within which they are built, in the sense of what can you do to enhance the community as part of this development, such as Councillor Summers has just said. Why not use the school building for something that can actually enhance the community so that they get something back for the development that's going on in their area? And that, to me, just doesn't happen. Now, I take Councillor Weldon's point, there may be limitations because of the national planning policy framework. I don't believe that limitation is as tight as it may be. I don't think we're using the way that we plan in this county enough to make sure that development does sit well with the communities within which it is actually built. I don't think there's enough done on that. And I really do think that is something that is part of the recommendation I've already made, but it's part of something that we really do need to look at as a county planning department.
Okay, I can see we've got two cabinet members' hands up. Apologies, I don't see the participation list, so I don't know who has their hand up first. Right, okay, I'm informed it's Councillor Harvey. So we can go briefly to the cabinet members, and then Councillor Bowes has a question. Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as a scrutiny committee, you're not making decisions, you're making recommendations. But if you wish to stay closely in touch with this as a decision as it moves through the process, you have the option to say that you would like it to come back for pre-decision scrutiny at a later stage, once the studies have been undertaken and the financial viability is better understood, and the options for the way to get best value from this as a council-owned asset are clearer. So that's an option for you if you wish to stay in touch with this, but there are no decisions to be made at the moment, only recommendations. And yes, this is an item on your agenda, but you're looking at this in isolation, but it is not being considered in isolation in the way that the council is looking at making best use of this as part of its property portfolio. So all of the things that you're talking about in terms of sustainability, viability, the needs of the community, local infrastructure, will all form part of the assessment that gets undertaken, because that's simply part of the process. The whole point of neighbourhood development plans is to ensure that the community has the opportunity to have a say very locally in developing planning policies that are appropriate to the development area that the plan relates. So the neighbourhood plan for the area would be part of what is taken into consideration, because that's the planning policy voice of the community. And hopefully the local residents of Home Lacey have taken an active part in the development of the neighbourhood plan, and the parish council always has a voice on planning matters on behalf of its residents. So there are plenty of ways in which people can stay closely connected with this as it goes forward, and that the committee can stay closely involved with it if it so wishes to recommend to do that.
Yes, thank you for the clarification, Councillor Harvey. I'm sure all the committee is aware of that, but thank you for highlighting the issues about how members of the public through the planning process can also contribute, and no doubt have already contributed. Councillor Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just reiterating what Councillor Harvey has just said, actually. You know, the NDPs are an important document through the planning process, and, you know, the wishes and so the residents in every area do understand their areas, what it needs and how the communities can be together, what sort of housing they need and what community assets they require. And if it's felt that the former school could be used as an asset, then those are the considerations we have to consider as well. So, you know, the communication side through this process will be the defining thing that we do for the area. And whether it is market housing or affordable housing, we still have to address the same issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Bowes, and I think we should then move to just do a synopsis of the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, if we sold, I'm not a planning expert, by the way, if we sold the land on open market, I assume that we would have less control over what's built. Is that true? So actually, by developing this ourselves, we would have more control over what is built there and how it's built.
Councillor Tyler.
If we sold it on the open market, it'd be like we would have to sell it with outline planning. We would have to put conditions on the land, so to ensure that the type of housing that's built, the passive house standard that we require, local need that is necessary to sort of consider for. So there'll be appropriate conditions attached to an outline planning permission.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. Councillor Bowes wants to come back on that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Maybe just to clarify, the recommendations in the report today, I think maybe that's where some of the confusion is, because it says the committee reviews the future development options, which implies that the options are selling or developing. So I think that's probably where some of the confusion has come from. So maybe rewording that recommendation or bearing that in mind for future. But I think the implication where it says developing options to us would imply selling it and developing, but we've only had the developing options that we've been able to consider. So that would be my point on that.
And Councillor Tyler, I think the point would be we don't have to get planning permission on the site to sell it. It would be advisable because it would obviously increase the value of the land, but it's not something that we have to do in order to dispose of the land. But it would be interesting. Obviously, it would affect the value of it. But Councillor Bowes' point about control of what is built there. Obviously, if the council building houses there, then they can determine 100% what happens. But if it's sold on the open market, and a design comes forward that perhaps the council is not best pleased with or thinks should be better, there is then, in my experience, a debate about viability, and the housing developer saying, well, yes, I understand that you want all of the bells and the whistles, but we won't be able to build these houses because the project's just not viable. And so I think Councillor Bowes' point is that there's less certainty about what actually gets built on the site if it's in the hands of the open market, rather than if the council owns the site and can decide what gets built and how many houses, etc. Right.
Yes, I'd like to come back to that, because, you know, each site will have to go through the rigorous planning process. All members and the planning committee will have that input, and the planning officer who will deal with the applications will have that steer from the RSPDs and the Heritage of Future Homes. And what we'll be considering, developers do bring the viability card, but we have to ensure that what we are delivering is what the council wants to achieve on every single site. So there will be negotiation processes, but the ultimate decision will be coming through council most probably in developing these sites. So all members and planning committee will have the ability to challenge developers as they bring these development proposals forward into the planning process.
Okay, and Councillor Bowes just wants to come back.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. I think the point I was trying to get across is it's actually more beneficial for residents and locals, in my opinion, if we develop the land rather than a private developer, because we will have much more control. So that was the point I was trying to get across. Sorry if I didn't do that very well.
Okay, I think the point's been made. Right, Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to go back, in fact, you said what I was going to say with regard to there's not a requirement to have planning approval on a site. You can go without planning approval. But my concern is in what we're considering today, as Councillor Bowes has pointed out, it talks about future development, and we haven't got that information, and apparently we're nowhere near that information coming to us. So it's not a case of asking for it to come back to committee. We are not able to address the entirety of the report because it is not available. Thank you, Chairman.
The entirety of the remit of the consideration, rather than the report. Yes, and I think what we'll do is we will summarise what recommendations we've got out of today's meeting, and then, you know, as we've been reminded by Councillor Harvey, we can revisit this matter when more information is available with regard to what the prospects would look like if it was sold on the open market. And I think that's something we could call in and discuss at another time. Right, I think I'd like to move on to what recommendations we've got now. So can I ask officers to present that to us?
So the recommendations, as I have them, bear with me. Yeah. I'll make it a little bit bigger for everybody. What's on the telly? So the recommendations, as I captured them through the meeting, the first recommendation was presented by Councillor Stark, which was that the executive is instructed to look at the local operation of the plan process and whether it takes sufficient account of the impact of developments on the wider infrastructure, and particularly on amenities such as the availability of GP and dental surgeries and the provision of public transport. Recommendation 2. Any Herefordshire Council pipeline or other council-owned land being considered for development, that as part of its viability, the inclusion of all relevant required social amenities, the entire local population, for example, doctors, surgeries, are considered as part of the process of viability and plan process. Third recommendation, that the executive looks at the way the heads of terms negotiations are conducted with developers to ensure that any Section 106 contributions take full account of local needs and wishes and not just be driven by what the developer may be willing to contribute. Recommendation 4, that the executive ensure that the project management team build in clear points in time where the ward member or members are notified and where appropriate involved in ongoing considerations around the site design and options going forward. That recommendation was adjusted slightly in the likes of Neil Taylor's comments, which hopefully draw in that distinction from other site visits. The Holme Lacey School building, as part of the design considerations, be considered as a community asset to be used by and benefit the local community. And finally, the executive provides further information to the scrutiny committee on the assessment of the viability of the land for selling on the open market and private development.
Okay, Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. The last point where it said provide further information to be scrutinised, I would like to add.
Well, I think what we would do is we would, when it comes to the work programme, just make sure that flagging up that we would like to discuss that at a later time. Yeah, is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, any more recommendations that we want to put forward? No? Right, okay, and I take it there's consensus about all of those recommendations. So I'll propose from the chair, seconded by the vice chair, Councillor Bowes. All in favour? Okay, thank you very much. And right, we come to the end of this item, and just to thank all of the cabinet members, and in particular all of the members of the public who contributed and listened to the discussion. And you members of the public will please note that this is an issue that we still want to discuss more fully and bring back to scrutiny when we've got further information about various other options for the council. So it's a work in progress, but we thank you for your interest, and we hope that you will be interested again when we discuss these matters in future. Thank you. Right, okay, so does anybody want a 5-minute break? Yes, okay, so can we have a break?
You know what?
Interesting. You will be interested in the future. Thank you. Right, okay, so
What contact was? Deja vu.
Chairman, we are live.
right, okay, thank you. So the scrutiny committee is recommencing. We've just had a short break after discussing the Home Lacey item. And thank you for all that have contributed to that item this morning. We now move on to the agenda item that was first on the agenda, but we skipped that in order to help members of the public who were in attendance to discuss their item first. But now we move on to the priority flood repair works capital programme realignment. There's been change in the costs, and so this matter will have to come back to council, and we're using the scrutiny opportunity to assess the fact that there's been a realignment. Are we having an officer presentation on this item?
No presentation, Chairman, but officers are in attendance to be able to answer questions.
Okay, so members of the committee will note that, as I say, there's a requirement to realign the costs. Do we have any questions for the officers and cabinet present? So, Councillor Stark and then Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. Can I refer to the table that's in the decision doc itself on page 19? I'll just let every committee member bring up the table. I think Councillor Wilder might be struggling. Overall, it looks like a good picture, Chair, but I think we have to look at some of the detail just to make sure that we are scrutinising the table properly. And my concern is around the second item there, which is the overspend on the retaining wall collapse. The overspend by 150,000. I have looked at all the information given to the committee, Chair, but I'm not able to form a clear picture on how that 150,000 has come about. I think we really should be requesting that information. If there's an officer here today that can give us that clarification, then I'll be very grateful. But my point is, without knowing how that 150,000 is made up, we don't know the cause of the overspend. We don't know whether we are picking up a bill for something that Balfour Beatty may have decided upon in the way that they approached the retaining wall collapse operation, something that may be down to them rather than us. And I would like to have asked the officer, why are we picking up that bill as a council rather than say it being part of Balfour Beatty's sort of cost in terms of the way that they actually approached the operation to remedy the collapsed wall. So without that information, I can't really scrutinise it, Chair.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Stark. A really important question. Is anybody on the cabinet or officers in attendance able to answer that specific question about why there's £150,000 more in the costing of that one particular repair?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman, I'm in attendance, but I am going to hospital pass it to the officer, which is Mairead Lane. I think the point that Councillor Stark makes, though, is that we've got here basically a slight overspend on one estimation. We've got a considerable underspend on another estimation. And I think the point that Councillor Stark is making is you know, how we had to go and get these budgets, if you remember, before the designs were completed. So I think he's very right that we need to hold contractors like Balfour Beatty to account. However, I think we have to be realistic about when we borrowed the money and the estimations that we had to make around that, and what actually, you know, eventually ended up being spent. But it's still a fair point that clarity on detail of what the extra money was spent on is necessary. And I'll let Mairead answer that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harrington. Welcome to the meeting, I should have said. But glad that you're here. Yes, point noted. But we'll go over to the officer, Mairead Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Harrington sets out the estimated costs for all of the high priority works listed in the Cabinet and Council reports last summer were high level estimates. They were based on estimates done on anticipated works packages shortly after the flood compensation event, and they were presented as that as the detail was being developed at the time the reports were being drafted. The costs that we present today are those which have been scrutinised by the contract management team in terms of as the works have been delivered by Balfour Beatty. So the Lechmere works package resulted in a simple excavation and replacement of materials, and as a result the actual cost of doing that work is a lot less than the high level estimate presented in the reports last year. The Stone Cottage retaining wall design was a more complex scheme, and its costs are closer to the estimate produced by set out in the council reports produced by Balfour's over the spring last year after the flood event. And the cost increase over and above that high level estimate is based on the outturned costs, which are a mix of the works tender costs plus events which have occurred on site, which the contractor is eligible to be paid for following scrutiny of the events, compensation events as they're called under the contract, by the client team within Herefordshire Council. And are also a mix of additional costs associated with compensation to landowners whose land we needed to take entry to construct the works. And any of the costs, for example, associated with correction to the parapet wall detail, which I think the councillor mentioned, which we do not consider under the contract are allowable and should not be paid by Herefordshire Council, have been disallowed or are not included in that cost presented within today's report.
Thank you, Mairead Lane. Councillor Stark wants to come back, and I also note that Mr. Taylor's hand is up as well, so we'll come to him after Councillor Stark.
No, my general point is that without that information before us, we can't consider whether we are happy with those costs being allocated to the county in terms of having to pay for it. And if this goes before full council, Mairead, you're going to get exactly the same question. You're going to get exactly the same pushback from the full council to say, where did this 150,000 emanate from? Now you're giving us an explanation why, and you're saying contractually we are on a bound to pay it. But the first thing that comes to mind to me is, who paid for the cost of that crane going on site, which was then unable to be used to actually make the repair of the wall? Are we bearing the cost of that or not? That's the point. Because there's no clarification, I can't actually be certain whether some of the decisions that Balfour Beatty made that then proved to be unsuitable for what was required here, it has not actually ended up with us having to pay that bill. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes, so I would add to that. There's obviously, it's understandable if there's some scepticism about the cost of things when scrutiny committee spent a lot of time over the fact that there was delay with repairs, initial repairs, simply because the solution was deemed to be unfeasible because they didn't have the right equipment, and that costed that cost a delay to the project, and obviously that there would be delays in costs because of delay. And so that's why Councillor Stark, I think, is really keen to get to the bottom of if there are operational costs that haven't been accounted for, but that are contractually that they're allowed to be paid. How does the scrutiny committee know that that's a reasonable request, as opposed to what happened in the past where there was a delay because a wrong assessment was made or operationally? So if I go back to Mairead Lane and then Mr. Taylor wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. There is a whole level of detail behind the figures presented in today's report, which comprises a list of correspondence around changes to the contract, which the contractor has put a cost against, and the contract management team have assessed, either agreed with, disagreed, reduced. And the particular issue of the parapet design, and I just want to clarify the point made around a crane coming to site that couldn't do the works. Just to be clear, whilst we had an issue with the parapet design and the type of equipment that could be used on site, there wasn't any equipment that came to site that had to be taken off site. We arrived at a solution for the parapet installation prior to any site works being undertaken. But there were costs associated with the parapet design, the need to review that to ensure that the design that produced by WSP was buildable, which have been disallowed from the quote provided by the contractor. And that level of detail sits behind the costs within today's report, sits with the contract management team in the change control system on Business World.
So can I just come back on that specific point? Why isn't that detail in the report? Because that's what Councillor Stark wants to scrutinise. Just giving headline figures isn't giving enough of an opportunity for Councillor Stark to scrutinise to flesh out the points he wants to make.
I mean, certainly it would be a lot of information if we were to put the whole change control list and detail around that, but I'm sure there's a way we could summarise and provide an outline of the areas of change within the contract where costs have been agreed between us and the contractor, and a summary of where costs have been disallowed.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, can I just come?
Yes, Mr. Taylor and then Councillor Harrington.
Yeah, I think we're slightly losing sight of what this report is all about. And we're using the word overspend very freely. The report to full council listed an overall programme envelope of 4.27 million. In that, it was identified some high level estimates of what the work might be. We were faced with some serious flood damage. People were looking at it, sticking a finger in the air and saying, I think it's about £1 million. And what you've got here is the outturn. It's not an overspend, it's an outturn. And the outturn of one of the projects is a very large underspend because we found a cheaper way to deal with it. And the other one is £150,000 more than that finger in the air high level estimate. And the purpose of this report is to move money within that 4.27 envelope to account for that. If you want to scrutinise the final account of an individual project, we can organise that for you, but it is a different conversation.
Councillor Harrington.
Yes, I was just going to make the point probably less clearly than Mr. Taylor's just done. The point, I think the point of this report is to say to you guys as general scrutiny, this is coming to council. It's a reallocation of funding. Essentially, it's an underspend, but it's been split into two sections, and one of them was obviously a slight overspend. If you want more information, or if there's a desire to scrutinise this beyond the contract management team to scrutinise this very closely to make sure that we're holding our contractors to account, and also beyond the independent review, which is currently being carried out by a consultant to make sure that everyone acted as best they could, or where we can learn lessons, including people like myself, that is perhaps slightly a different issue. So I think what we're saying today is, do you agree and to put this money back into the larger flood budget?
Okay, well, I mean, I'm interested to hear Councillor Stark's view, and then Councillor Bowes, and then Councillor Wilding want to, well, all the committee want to come in one by one. But I think perhaps then, as this will come to full council, then it would perhaps be advisable, and it might be a recommendation from us, that proper clarity is provided about how the eventual costs are calculated and arrived at, and then that will provide clarity over the matter of whether it's seen as an overspend or not. And if you make clear to members that, you know, there are operational costs that have to be accounted for, so it's very difficult to give a final price until all of that has been factored in, then that I think will be really beneficial to inform the council when it comes to council considering the matter. Right, okay, who did we have? So we've got Councillor Stark and then Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Harrington. I mean, I was just about to ask, was the independent review going to pick this up? And with respect to Mr. Taylor, we've lived with Found Hope as a political issue since the flooding. It's been a national issue in the national press as well.
February 2020.
So when someone presents me with a figure that looks like an overspend on what has been a very sensitive and national issue, then I'm going to ask the question: what we need here is all that context, as you said, maybe not all the detail, but the context that would at least have reassured us that was exactly what you said. It was an estimate. The outturn came out at £150,000 more. Here's the reasons why the estimate didn't quite meet the outturn, and then we could have assessed that. But this was a very sensitive issue for the whole county. We were under national scrutiny in this, and even though, and I do accept that we weren't properly funded on it, so we actually had to pick up the funds ourselves, we as councillors across the county still have to be reassured that the money was spent in a way that was I think sensible and prudent as far as our residents are concerned. So that's where I'm coming from. And if the independent review is going to pick up some of these points, then fine. But perhaps there is a general recommendation, Chair, again with this item, that we're not clear as to exactly what we've been asked to do in some respects, because I was thinking that this was also about looking at the spend as a cut. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey, did you wish to make a point about this specific point, or because I've got 4 other councillors wanted to come in, but is it relating to what's just been said?
Yes, I think so. But let you be the judge of that, Chairman. Would it be helpful to offer to provide an overview of the process for allocating funds to lines in the capital programme, and then how the detail of those projects is then worked up and the decision process run through to allow individual projects actually to go forward and through their detailed project management? Because what we have here in the report is basically, as Mr. Taylor said, a high level programme budget to cover a number of different flood works that needed to be undertaken. 2 lines of which were given in slightly more detail. And there is a slight adjustment that's needing to be made between the way that the overall sum is being allocated, but there isn't an increase in the overall funding being sought. But I do understand that committee members might want to understand in more detail how the funds are allocated through the decision-making process, and it may be of more general assistance to members and to the public to understand how we go about this from one end of the process to the other.
I think that would be very helpful. I think that would be very, very helpful. Right. So thank you for that. Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so with underspends and overspends, it sounds like we've underspended, so that's good. And part of this is about what that money then may go towards, I guess, other funding for other flooding projects. I'd just like to put a word in for possibly some of that money to be added to the Climate and Ecological Emergency Fund, so that it goes towards projects which will affect flooding in the future, but may not be actually repairing flood damage in the present. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
The only thing is that, Councillor Wilding, I don't think there's a surplus of cash here. It is the cash is needed elsewhere within this capital project. So I don't think there's a surplus that can be diverted elsewhere. Is that right? I take that that's the case.
Yes, that's the case. There is Whitney on Wye yet to complete, and there are a large number of minor repairs, which we're just going through the tender returns for, that need to be done.
Yeah. Right. Councillor Summers and then Councillor Decky.
I might be a little bit off base with this one, but I'm quite concerned about, we're going to have more floods. Has there been an independent engineer to check what we spent 4 million on? For example, if this flood takes this out again for bad workmanship, which I'm afraid does happen around the county, I've got a couple of places that I know of, who's going to be responsible for fixing it? Is it Balfour Beatty or whoever contracted the work to? So do we have an independent engineer checking this work? So I think we need to have that in writing, that it's being checked and it passes all the rules that an engineer would want. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a question there. Who does a quality assurance of the work we commission? I think that's the best way.
That's what you said it better than me.
Yeah. Is someone able to answer that question?
I hope, Mairead, can you answer that? But before I answer that, can I just say, as part of the independent review, that's what will be one of the things that the consultant will be looking at is the post-works checks and their robustness.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harrington. Mairead Lane, are you able to add to that?
Yes, sure. Just Chair, to explain the process. Both the Lechmere Lay and the Stone Cottage schemes, a detailed specification for the works was put together, and the works were delivered to the public realm contract, but actually there was a principal subcontractor engaged for each. Golden Valley Construction in the case of Lechmere Lay, and Alan Griffiths Construction in the case of Stone Cottage. The delivery of the works was supervised on our behalf by a clerk of works and a site agent from Balfour Beatty in the case of both projects. And the works were supervised on the basis that they had to be delivered to the specification developed and signed off on that basis at the end of each contract.
Okay, and that was undertaken by Balfour Beatty, sorry.
Yes, yeah, the supervision and of the works on site was undertaken on our behalf by Balfour Beatty. The actual works themselves in the case of each contract were delivered by another subcontractor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chairman. Really, it's the same question relating to items 3 and 4 on the table on page 19. I think it would be helpful if there was a put in context, as has been agreed with the Found Hopes landslip, because there's nearly £1 million difference in the original and the realigned. It would be ideal, I think, essential to have an understanding of what's happened there. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the committee are minded and are getting it in their minds that we're not talking about overspends or underspends. What we're trying to do is nail down how we understand the true costs of projects within a framework, and greater understanding of that is what's been offered, and I think would help the committee in understanding it. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Taylor, just to clarify, given previous administration issues with overspend on projects, I think we're now looking at costs. So what we're much hotter now on costs than we were. So from my perspective, my issue is is there anything that we can learn, and has there been a post-mortem, for want of a better phrase, to look at, we thought it was going to cost this, but it's actually cost that? Is there any lessons there that we need to learn, because we've fallen foul before of project management issues? So from my perspective, is there anything there that we can learn from, or is it just a general overspend for whatever reason? But I also think it would have been helpful in a table of some sort to say what that extra 150,000 was made up of. That would have just provided some clarity. Thank you.
Shall I come back on that, Chair?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, I think second part first. We could have provided more detail. However, that detail is enormous, and the offer still stands if members want to scrutinise that final account, and in parallel with that, how these projects are developed in terms of design, specification, and cost. We can do them on a separate occasion, no problem. But going back to the lessons learned, we can learn a tremendous amount from this. We are far too keen to nail down a budget capital cost at a stage before we even know what the work is. And as an organisation, we need to get ourselves away from that, and we need to be able to, because the problem is that in order to get a capital allocation, you need to say how much money it's going to be. So you take a punt at how much money it's going to be, then out of that capital, you do all the design work, and you realise what the cost is, and it's either £500,000 less, or it's more than you thought it was. What we need to develop as a process, and this unfortunately is a revenue issue, is we need to be able to design projects to a reasonable level of certainty before we start saying how much capital it's going to cost, because we're shooting ourselves in the foot continuously by taking these very, very early finger in the air estimates, because that's what we're being asked for. And then finding it varies one way or the other. And actually, you only ever hear about the ones that are more. There are quite a few that often end up less. It's a swings and roundabouts thing. But we need to change our process of the way we design projects and then get them in the capital program or allocate a capital budget to them to make sure that we are much, much clearer what's involved before we do that. That is the lesson to be learned.
Councillor Rose just wants to come back.
Thank you, that's really helpful. In terms of the chart, I just meant, I understand that I work in finance, so I understand there'll be millions of lines of cost, but I just think something summarising, 20,000 was on this, 20,000 was on that, etc. But I would agree with you. I think we're making, from an outside perspective, informed decisions is the key, not just guessing and sticking our finger in the air, and that's something that we do need to incorporate into our future plans. There is no point just estimating, because I could say it costs 20,000 and it could cost 40, as my other half always tells me. So I think that is something that we definitely need to look at going forward. Thank you.
Okay, we've got the Leader of the Council, who's got his hand up, and also Councillor Hitchin's got his hand up, and we've got also Councillor Davis. But before we just go over to them, the point that Mr. Taylor's really helpfully made, normally I would say it's up to this committee to put forward recommendations and we'll choose the wording. But I think your point about the process, about how we budget things, I think that should be a recommendation in itself. And I would look to Mr. Taylor, is there any wording we could ask him to provide in order to formulate that really important point about how we move forward with projects? Because obviously there's a big operational difference between a finger in the air and when you actually come to do the works and find out how much it all costs. So if you could, if you've any thoughts on how we would word that recommendation, if you could pass that to John Coleman, that'd be very helpful. And now we go to the Leader of the Council, Councillor Hitchin.
Thank you, Chair. We're concentrating, of course, on this 150,000 overspend, and I haven't heard very much mention of the saving of $1 million on the other project. And I think we should be congratulating ourselves for coming in And there may be learnings from that million saving. So let's not just look at the learnings from an overspend, but learnings from the underspend as well. So my congratulations to everybody for coming in. But I mean, to Mr. Taylor's point, I mean, the estimates were provided early. We had to do that in order to get the decision making through. Taking on the chairman's point there about process, I think that my view is that this committee should be looking at the process, not the detail. So if something costs £20,000 to do, well, I'm not an engineer, and I don't think anybody else is. We're not elected as engineers. We shouldn't be delving into the weeds and the details to how items cost. We would need to make sure the process is robust. And I would hope that under this administration, some of the learnings we've taken on board are to make sure there's much better control of all this. So maybe the committee wants some assurance that those controls are in place, but I don't think going into the weeds and asking for should it be 20,000 or 25,000, where too many days spent on this or the other is up to this committee. You can challenge us as an administration to make sure we are following those things, and I can assure you we are very careful about doing this, having been critical of previous administration's efforts. So just kind of two pleas really. First of all, let's not forget we've come in significantly under budget in one of these items. What can we learn from that? And also just a request that we look at the process rather than too much of the detail. Thank you.
Councillor Starr.
Thank you, Councillor Hitchner. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make. I'm using the 150,000 as a way in to see whether we were challenging what Balfour Beatty were charging us in terms of this overall project. That's what I was getting at. I'm not trying to say that 150,000 should be 145 or 155 or 120. What I'm trying to get at, where there are costs involved in this that we shouldn't have picked up as a council, and that's what was concerning me. And when I saw the so-called extra money being allocated to this line, it was an obvious question to ask, because this particular project has been bedeviled with delay and with seemingly confused decision on site and otherwise that has become not quite a national scandal, but certainly a national concern and certainly a county concern. So the 150,000 is almost immaterial in a way, but it just highlighted a point to me where we on top of this in terms of making sure that Balfour Beatty weren't charging us for something we shouldn't have picked up. That's the point I was trying to make, Chair.
Yes, thank you, and that's understood. Councillor Davis, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Chair. Speaking of chairs, there's somebody's got a really squeaky chair that just keeps on going all the time. I don't know whose it is, but it's picking up on the microphone quite bad. One of the queries here is around process, and I really would advise you to look back at not last cabinet, I believe it was the cabinet before, full session, where we discussed the things that we were going to put in place following the overspend on the City Link Road, but also pulling together the value for money assessment on the Balfour Beatty contract that we've been working on, and I commissioned it in 2020, and we finally got all of the results from it that say about different ways in which we procure, different ways in which we commission work, and what that looks like. So we currently have 2 officers in which their sole role is to look at the project management and commissioning and procurement of public realm projects. So we have those people in place now. So what I don't want to do is end up in a never-ending scrutiny circle when those processes have been put in place now. Now what we need to do is hold those processes to account, and that's for me is where audit absolutely fits in, and they will say whether or not those processes are followed. But the overspends, the underspends, etc., we only need to look at some of the procurements that have failed within the council under the old system of us putting a finger in the air, guessing the amount, and then when it comes to the design stage, we end up with ridiculous, even before the design bid, we end up with absolutely ridiculous amounts on a procurement, because why would you take the risk if you were a supplier of you putting in a bid that was way under what was going to be required? So Neil's point about getting it at the right time with regards to procurement, with regards to allocating a capital budget, is absolutely essential. But I just want to make sure that there's no duplicity here with the work that's already been completed on value for money and our commissioning and procurement experts that we now have working for the council.
Sorry, did you mean duplication rather than duplicity?
Yes, sorry. Do you know what? It's my annual leave week, so I'm not to be blamed for a bad word.
Just to be fair to officers, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Absolutely.
Jolly good. Just to show you I was paying attention. Right. Okay. Any further comments at this stage? I think we'll come to Councillor Durkin. I think part of the point with scrutiny of this is where you see figures adrift, or more or less, or what have you. And I take Councillor Hitchener's point about the other projects with considerably less expenditure. More detail in the explanation allows scrutiny to put the issue into context. And I would always, members get bamboozled by so much information, but I think a scrutiny committee who really wants to get to the nuts and bolts of this, more information is better. So that they can have that information to hand, rather than feel as though they're being asked to scrutinise something where there's a lack of information or a lack of context for them to digest the issues at hand. So that proper explanations about how contracts actually pan out, as opposed to capital budgets, fingers in the air, would, I think, allay some of councillors' fears and make the issues more clear. Right, so do I have Councillor Durkin, and then we'll see, and Councillor Summers, and then we'll see if we can come up with a look at our recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to not necessarily duplicate what Councillor Stark has said. I'll have the duplicity got to be cleared up. What I'm looking for is not to look into the weeds of anything. I just want to enable them to put into context, which you've covered quite succinctly in your remarks. And I think what would be beneficial to the scrutiny and to the council would be the proposal that Mr. Taylor is going to put together, which is an idiot's guide to whatever, to construction, etc. I think it would be good that if we can promote that as a council and as a committee, so that we are looking at the right things at the right time and not sticking fingers in the air, wet fingers. So it's just about making the context appropriate. Thank you, Jim.
Yes, well, thank you. And I've obviously set Mr. Taylor some homework to come up with a recommendation, but we'll get to that in a second. Are there any more points? Sorry, Councillor Summers, that's correct, yeah.
I'm just going back to independent. I don't think Belford Beatty are independent. And I'm saying once again, we just spent 4 million, and who's checking that work? Because if that collapses in a year from now, who's going to come good for it? Is Belford Beatty signing on and take responsibility for it? And what's that responsibility mean? Thank you.
Okay,
can I come back on that, Chair?
You've got your hand up, but Councillor Harrington, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just so Balfours are our contract. Well, they have been our contractor on this. They will have all the responsibility, Councillor Summers, for any failure, and then we have also had our own contract management team looking at the way the contract was dealt and progressed. But in terms of actual structural stuff, that responsibility and risk will lie with Balfours.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harrington. Mairead Lane, did you want to add anything?
Councillor Harrington said it very succinctly. We are in a contract with Balfour Beatty. We will have both their professional indemnity insurances to cover any kind of failures that he's described, and certainly within the first 12 months defects correction period, where we will ensure that any defects notified within that period are corrected by Balfours at no cost to the council, and thereafter we will have the insurances and indemnities provided through the contract.
Okay, so there you have your answer. Right, okay, can we go over to John? Have you got some recommendations there? They've been forwarded.
I only have two, one of which was one of the recommendations that perhaps Neil Taylor may wish to comment on and was going to potentially provide some wording on. So one of the recommendations was that more detail on the overall cost should be considered for the full council report to aid members in reviewing this full council, which I believe will be going on the 8th of October. And then secondly, the suggestion that the council is already moving towards a revenue-based focused on looking at the design stage in much more detail than then funding, capital funding is then allocated. So possibly some clumsy wording, Mr. Taylor, but please let me know if I can correct it in any way that's helpful. But moving forward with strategic projects, greater emphasis should move to revenue funding more detailed design phases to ensure greater confidence can be given to allocating capital funding.
Mr. Taylor, would you like to comment on the wording of that recommendation?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. Can I shall look at it after the meeting if that's okay, and I'll clarify if that's all right.
Okay, but for the purposes of the meeting, the committee.
It looks reasonable. It looks reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, but along those lines of greater clarity on how projects are costed at a more advantageous time. Councillor Stark.
Yes, on the first recommendation, I'm trying to get this point about reassurance that when it comes to Balfour Beatty charging us for a particular project like this, we are only picking up the cost that we should pick up as a council. That's a recommendation I was really wanting to get at. Now that allows officers then to come back and reassure us as a committee chair that is the case, but I'd like us to actually make that as a recommendation that we can be reassured that on this particular project, Balfour Beatty are only charging us for the cost that we should have picked up as a council.
Okay, so more assurance is needed.
Yes, on that particular point, yes.
Okay, so the recommendation to the executive would be to provide members with an assurance that the costs, the extra costs that have been identified, or the final costs, the final costs that have been identified are those that have been properly identified as those costs that the council should pay.
Should pay for rather than Balfour Beatty picking up, yes.
And that's just for the clarity of members.
And then the officers can come back and tell us, and then full council has that in front of them as well when it comes to this particular point.
So a matter of presentation rather than challenge.
Given what we've been told today, we didn't know that until we asked it.
No, which is helpful to scrutinise. Right, okay, so then the wording of the recommendations being amended to encapsulate that.
Okay, so apologies if this needs a little bit of wordsmithing, but more detail on the overall costs and assurances, assurances are given that on this final cost, on the final costs of this project, the council have been charged for only the costs it is liable for, and these are included in the full council report.
Okay. Are we all happy with that?
It catches the sentiment.
Yeah. Okay. Any more recommendations with this item? And I think to take home Councillor Hitchener's point, also clarification on how effective the council has been in ensuring that there are reduced costs with the other projects would probably help members too.
Something in there about the learning to make sure that we're taking away where we brought in less and we spent, overspend and underspend. It would be useful to know that you know, these lessons learned are being taken forward into future projects so that we can amend our process accordingly. I don't know, something that people want.
Could that be added to the information be provided by Mr. Taylor?
Well, why don't we do a third recommendation about lessons learned?
Yeah.
To be carried forward into future projects.
Yeah.
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 As a standalone.
Right.
Okay, so possibly not quite the right wording at the moment, but a third recommendation would be that a lessons learned from this particular project is to be taken forward into future projects.
Yeah, that's the sentiment of the point that the committee is making.
Yeah, or maybe not just this project, but ongoing future project, all projects. You know, you have a lessons learned and take that forward to the next one so that we don't. That's it.
That should be all. Suggest amendment from this to all.
All. Yeah.
All. Okay.
Lessons learned from this and all future projects.
Yeah, fine.
To be taken forward into future projects again.
Okay, any more recommendations on this item? Okay, well, thank you for all those that have contributed. And so I'll propose from the chair those three recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Chair, all in favour? Right, thank you, that's unanimous. Right, that concludes that item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is Maylord Orchards. The committee would like to discuss the issue of, there are some pieces of information with regard to this agenda item that are confidential, and therefore some of that information is not in the public domain. The committee has a query as to what information should or should not be in the public domain, and therefore, in order to seek clarification from officers, I now propose to move that this meeting goes into closed session until we can get clarification of these points, and then we will resume the meeting after that in public. So can I ask for the recording to be paused while we go into closed session so that officers and the scrutiny committee can just raise these points, and that. Okay, thank you. Just to confirm that we're recommencing the scrutiny committee held today, and we had a short recess in closed session just so that the members of the scrutiny committee could get clarification about what documents could and could not be discussed with the Maylord Orchard item. We've now sought clarification and got that clarification, and we are now able to proceed with the rest of the meeting, where we will be discussing the acquisition of a lease of Maylord Orchard and the plans that the council has to augment the site and continue in its operation as a retail centre. Right, okay, so do we have a presentation from officers?
No formal presentation.
Okay, we have cabinet members in attendance as well, but if we go to the scrutiny committee to open the questions on this item. Councillor Stark.
I'll start. Thank you, Chair. As you know, in past scrutiny committees, I've always raised the point about my concern about decisions being taken in isolation. And there may be good reasons for this one as well. My point being, as was the case with the head of the town hall and other property issues that we've discussed, that we should be taking a strategic approach to our property portfolio, that when we are deciding to spend a considerable amount of capital, 4.5 million, that somewhere we should have an options appraisal to determine whether spending the 4.5 million on this particular property is value for money in the context of our overall property portfolio, and wouldn't be better spent at that time, let's say, on recovering the Shire Hall? And that's my point. I mean, there may be good reasons why this decision had to be taken quickly, but we do see a number of decisions taken on property matters where I am concerned we're not actually referring back to the overall strategy and what we are trying to do with overall property portfolio. So that is my issue here, is the concern around this being taken in isolation, Chair, and whether there wasn't something better that we could have done with the 4.2 million or the 4.5 million at that time in terms of overall property portfolio.
Thank you, Councillor Stark, and I can see Councillor Davis's hand up. Councillor Davis.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Stark. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. Just to confirm, Councillor Harrington has actually left the meeting now because it's no longer his agenda item. So he said to say thank you for allowing him to be part of the committee. Maylord Orchards has always been part of a strategic direction and a strategic acquisition of the key site within Hereford City. What we have all experienced were the heydays of Maylord Orchards and how wonderful it used to be, and see it go into a decline and into a state of disrepair. It was a quick decision that needed to be made, only because negotiations of it being on the open market, etc., it became available to us at a very last minute, and we had people negotiating for us at the correct price, and also making sure that we didn't lose out to other people that were interested and perhaps may not have had the same vision of what we should be doing in that particular area. I absolutely take the point with you, Councillor Stark. I know we've had many conversations around this, around the property portfolio and making sure we have our strategy. And every time we make a decision, it comes back to those strategic reasons for why we're doing something. And Sarah Jowett, I will bring in a moment, is working on that strategy as we speak. It's a long piece of work that has been ongoing for gosh, since I started. We've been asking for a strategic property review. So 2019, you only have to look in the property team to see how few people now work there. They've been a team that's been decimated. So there's been different pulls on directions. And of course, during COVID, we lost the property team to build temporary morgues, etc. So Sarah is available, and I think it'd be really helpful if she gave a description of what that looks like coming forward. And apologies at the beginning for this. There are a number of things regarding Maylord Orchards that have not been decided by Cabinet yet, i.e. the new strategy for long-term strategy for Maylord Orchards. So I'm sure Sarah can touch on some of the suggestions that we're doing, but understand that the decision on it has not been made yet. So Sarah, can I bring you in there?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Davis. Yes, I mean, clearly we've got a lot of work to do in property to take it forward and have a strategic approach and actually get some procedures in place that help us to manage our property assets across the board, not just by property, but by services as well. So I think we have very clear vision, but it's not going to happen overnight. As Councillor Davis pointed out, we do have a reduced resource at the moment, and I need to prioritise. So the new strategic asset management plan is out with colleagues for final review before it goes to a more formal consultation and review process. I'm trying to write a set of procedures that will cover how we manage assets as a council. And then as part of that, what we're going to do is a full review of all our assets. So absolutely a joined up approach. And part of the strategic asset management plan will be a live delivery programme. But we need to review all the sites and understand how they all fit together. And we should end up with some form of recommendation for each one, which will be dispose, retain or review. And there will be a very small, I say business case loosely, a document that charts various information around buildings that sits behind those decisions. And then a rationalisation programme will need to be drawn up, which will then need to go forward for capital programmes. So it's not a short process if we're going to do it properly. And so work is in hand, and I would hope that by the middle of next year, we'll see some real progress on that. With regards to the interim management plan with Maylords, clearly we've worked closely with Councillor Davis and Councillor Harvey and Andrew to identify how we want to use the centre going forward to support the economic and regeneration growth in the city centre, bearing in mind the work around the city master plan that's ongoing. So we have been working clearly with projects identified under the Towns Investment Programme, Towns Investment Fund, because they want to use some of the units so that we can start to really make a social and economic environment there and a community, and that's what we want to try to build. So we've identified sort of a community zone where we can really support smaller local businesses and communities to present their wares and have access to space there. And with Hoople coming on board, we will work with our community colleagues to get a really vibrant events programme that brings footfall in and creates, say, a village sort of community environment. So that's the plan. There's a lot to do, and I'm not going to promise it be done overnight because it won't be. So was there anything else you wanted to touch? Sorry, Councillor Davis.
No, not for now. I'm sure people will be asking questions about Hoople, so I'll hold back until I'm sure there'll be questions over it. If not, happy to at the end bring in about the Hoople relationship and how that's going to work.
I'm sure that will be raised. Sorry, I've got Councillor Durkin.
It was on my previous point.
Yes, Councillor Stark wants to come back on that point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Davis. It doesn't really answer my point still. How can we assure ourselves that the 4.5 million we spent on this particular property acquisition was the best use of the money at that time and couldn't have been used on something else to greater effect in terms of what residents needed from us?
And I think that question that you're answering, I think we did in a roundabout answer say to you what the options are. The truth is, until we have that strategy nailed down, I don't believe that any decision before. So, for example, before we came in, the purchase of the College Road campus, that one didn't. That is an example of where we've been made an offer, we take advantage of that offer, but actually where's that long-term strategy for it? We must do this asset rationalisation and recognise that in areas within Herefordshire where we need to have assets, so we don't end up buying an asset because it's the right, we have that opportunity come up, but actually it's in the right place to be able to make real changes for the community in which it's based. So I know I'm in discussions with you about the Ryfield Centre as an example. Actually, what's the need there? What's the local community need? And that involves us working with across the whole of the council, but also with our health partners, also with education, to try and identify what that is. But we will not, and I genuinely believe this, we will not be able to have that firm answer unless we have a fully functioning asset strategy. And that's why it's the priority for Sarah and the team to try and get that up and running. I mean, the other thing obviously that we've got is that we had Andrew Lovegrove all over the purchase with regards to value for money in the assessment. And that's the other thing that we can use as a reason to make sure the purchase was the right thing to do. But I take the point, could we have used that money somewhere else? Possibly. A number of the things with the Shire Hall would have actually come out of revenue budget rather than capital. So that's also the extra problem of that.
Okay, we've got Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. A question regarding property strategy. Are you telling us that there was no property strategy going forward to 2019?
Could I bring in Andy Husbands on that, please? Is he in, Sarah? Or are you taking that one? You can take that question if you prefer, Sarah. I just thought Andy was here when I first came in.
Yeah. I do believe Andy's Oh, he was here. So,
I'm
oh, yeah,
here.
there you are, Andy. Hello, dear. I can see you. Yeah. And Andy can add to it because clearly he's been here longer, but there was an existing strategy, but it ran out last year. And it was a 5-year strategy, I believe, but Andy will confirm that. And of course, a lot of things change in 5 years. So hence we're doing the new strategy now. But Andy, did you want to add to that?
I think you covered it really. There was a strategy at the time. So the strategy was from 2016 to 2020. So we had a strategy, but as you sort of alluded to there in the answer, that obviously, things had moved on and elements of that strategy, had changed really.
Okay, Councillor Durkin, you wanted to come back?
I'll come back to that. Question: if the previous strategy ran from 16 to 20, was there no vision that it was coming up to 2020 and there needs to be a reviewed strategy document? And when was this new strategy document, as far as it is at the moment, published?
But no, they're currently working on a new strategy.
Yeah,
That's the point.
When was it started?
Ask Sarah when that work commenced.
It's been trying to commence since the moment that I came in 2019, but we had COVID, which meant that our property team have been pulled into dealing with the property issues related to that. So once post-COVID, well, we're not really post-COVID, are we? But post bringing people back, both Andy and Sarah have been working on that strategy. So this is a huge change from where we've been before. This is actually looking at proper asset rationalisation and making sure that when we're doing community asset transfers, that we're transferring the right buildings and that we're making sure we're not setting community groups up to fail. So it's ongoing, and that's why Sarah said next year is the realistic time to be able to do this huge transformational piece.
Thank you for that. Before we go to Councillor Bowes, Councillor Harvey's got a hand up, so we'll go to Councillor Harvey, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to come in on, the maybe it's a question that Mr. Lovegrove can answer, but you can see from the documentation in the agenda pack at paragraph 22 that there is a significant yield that is reported on the overall property portfolio that was purchased in total with Maylords. And although I have requested that we have business plans for all of our investments, all of our assets that are being managed as investments, that's a very decent return. So Councillor Stark's question about whether the money could have been better spent doing something else, there is a decent return on the investment that's been made in recovering the centre entirely to the council. But let's not forget that previous administrations' policies had effectively turned the city into a donut, with the city centre in significant decline. And it was really important for us to make a strategic intervention to start to turn that around. Maylords was an ideal opportunity to actually do that, both in terms of repurposing some of the accommodation for retail to reduce the amount of floor space that was competing for tenants, but also to do things that didn't compete with the internet, which has been very much part of the strategy that Councillor Davis and the property team have been developing, so that people actually come into the city in order to be able to access what's going to be available in Maylords, so that we're actually bringing people into the town centre, as well as starting to influence the commercial rents that are being asked for by commercial landlords elsewhere in the area. As far as the question from Councillor Durkin about strategies and whether they're being timely updated, When we came into administration, that absolutely wasn't the case. But, you know, I'm very glad to hear him talking about it. Because we have actually had to go to quite a lot of effort to try and understand what the timeframes are for all of the council's published strategies, and to get those captured and, you know, start to be project managed to make sure that there aren't air gaps between the end of one and the commencement of another. So we are on that case, but we didn't inherit anything at all to work with. So we've had to start from scratch on all of that.
I think there was a policy in place, but obviously these policies run their course and a new policy is required, which is across the board with all council policies. They run their course and a new one is required. Right, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions, so I'll do a couple and then refer to the colleagues. I just wondered, Councillor Davis, if you could tell me what the interest like in renting shops in Maylords compared to nationally, and are you able to tell us what footfall's like?
Yeah, I'll probably defer on the question regarding interest, because Andy or Sarah's probably best placed to do that, because they deal directly with prior to Hooper coming forward, Montague Evans, so they'll be able to answer that. But regarding footfalls, we have all of our footfall figures from Hereford Bid. So one of the really good things that they do, they're able to pick up on signals, etc., and tell us what the footfall's looking like. So actually what would be really interesting to you is, if you're interested in those figures, contacting Hereford Bid, and they will send it you month by month, week by week, what that footfall looks like. And I'm really pleased to see the upward trend now in Maylords, across the city, even in areas previously that people weren't visiting. So Gate, for example, they're on the increase as well. So those figures are available, but I'm going to defer to Andy or Sarah on the interest, but I believe it's above the national interest.
Yes, if perhaps I answer that one. Yes, so I mean, talking to our agents, Montague Evans, anecdotally, the interest has been better than a lot of retail centres nationally. Since we took the centre on, there have been 9 lettings that have been undertaken. 5 tenants have renewed their leases. Whilst we've got about, I think at the moment, 11 units are vacant, 2 of those are currently under offer or in discussion with prospective tenants. So I would say that against the national picture, that is good.
Thank you. And with regard to footfall, sorry, what was the point about footfall? It's increasing.
Yeah, we've got the figures from the bid will show the fluctuation on it, but you can see very clearly when we had lockdown and what that looks like coming back up. It might be really helpful for me to ask Hereford Bid to send you some of those figures so that you can see them.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that your questions?
Yeah, I'll come back.
Okay. Councillor Wiley.
Thanks, Chair. Perhaps I should have declared an interest at the start of the meeting, because I have an interest in providing culture and social and all those sort of things to the people in a place. And I really, I support what you're doing in Maylords. I think it has to be, because the focus of people shopping online rather than shopping in shops. So that means these sort of places, if you're going to encourage people to come in, you've got to provide things that they can't get online. So I understand that's exactly what the focus is. And you're obviously trying to move the library there and do various other things. Let me just focus in on one thing then. Is there a plan to introduce the sort of cultural input into Maylords that will increase footfall and attract media attention, so that we get free publicity to make people think, oh yeah, I want to go there? Is there, who's sort of behind that? Is there an arts organisation that are inputting into that sort of stuff? Thanks.
Councillor Davis, did you want to take that question?
Yeah, I'm really good. I know, and I know, William, Councillor Wilding, sorry, that you're really interested and you are a supporter of culture. So I'm always grateful for your input on that. Yeah, really excitingly, we have the Stronger Towns bids coming forward where culture in Maylords is the priority. And you're absolutely right. We cannot compete with online. We cannot compete with other retail sectors in the high street because that's wrong to do so. We don't pick from one to another. But actually, for me, growing up, the inside of Trinity Square, which is just outside, for those of you who don't know, the actual shopping centre itself, just in front of it is called Trinity Square. And Trinity Square, we used to have performances. There used to be book readings, there used to be plays, there used to be bands, used to have a beach during the summer. That used to happen. And what we're having are arts organisations moving in saying, actually, we want to reintroduce that. And we don't just want to introduce it there. We want to have performances in the service yards, etc. How do we repurpose every inch of space in the city in order to do that? So we're working with the Cultural Partnership within Herefordshire, and Herefordshire is very well regarded with the Arts Council to look at getting fundings and grants to enable those kind of things to happen. What we do know is that culture punches well above its weight with regards to the income that it provides to a city. So we know that in general, if somebody comes for a cultural event, they may stay overnight. They will certainly stay in the centre for much longer than if they were popping in for some shopping. We also know that it affects more encouragement of people to move to the area, or more importantly, not losing our young people to other cities that are offering that cultural offer. So you're absolutely right. Culture is at the heart of what we're doing with Maylord Orchards, and thankfully we've got a cultural sector that are completely behind it.
Thank you. Councillor Summers.
No, thank you for that. I'm just concerned about the back end of Maylord Orchards by the passageway. It's usually derelict. It's usually untidy. The passageway is usually full of all kinds of stuff because it's hidden in the back. We have meeting rooms in that area also. Do you think we'll be using that for something useful like the library, or is that where the library might be going? Because there's quite a bit of Maylord Orchards that's not retail, but it's just left stagnant. I know as a council we've had meetings in meeting rooms, but very few and far between. And since we're always looking for space, I'm wondering why we're not using it. Thanks.
So, two questions there. What about the tidying up the back, concerns about the back, and then obviously there's some amenity space, meeting rooms, are they going to be utilised?
Okay, yeah, so I think the place that you're referring to is Brewers Passage. So it's the one that connects to Commercial Street. Is that right, Councillor Summers? Yeah, it is. It's historically been a terrible place to walk through. And I know that I've spoken with Sarah and Andy about what kind of project could we get going down there. So can we put natural environments down there? So are we looking at trees, etc., making it look different? But I think it just needs a big paint job as well to make it more appealing and to make sure that we've got lights, because it is, I walk down there on my own and I do feel vulnerable walking through that bit. And I think that we need to look at how do we change that space from being just an alleyway to actually a really important part of Maylords, that people walk through it and go, this is a lovely introduction to Hereford City. And I get that you're connecting me to Commercial Street, you know, having that as part of it. So yes, absolutely, it's on the agenda, and I know Sarah and Andy have picked that one up. We've also got Incredible Art College and farriers that could be doing ironwork for us, that are able to identify particular areas. So I think that that's another option that we can look at. Yes, sorry.
So that's what I was thinking about, because we have window space there, which we could be an art gallery at no charge, which, you know, is better than leaving it the way it is. So I would like to see something in the arts field. And you know, right now they go into different places, crafts, go into different churches right now. We could send them there and make that passageway very very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Summers. Sarah and I were speaking the other day in a meeting and said how good it would be to have live arts down there. So you have an open window and people are actually able to observe people taking part in different cultural events. So like you said about ceramics, having somebody there making a vase or something like that in front of people to show them a new craft, because I think that would be something really special. So live events. Reference the meeting room. Can I hand that one over to either Sarah or Andy? Because I know we've got I've certainly got huge concerns about that meeting room upstairs in Maylords, because it's not Equality Act compliant. There's only one entrance and exit. So certainly in COVID times, we wouldn't be able to use it. But future wise, whether Sarah and Andy want to go into that particular room.
Well, talking about it or actually going into it.
You know, I realised when I said it, oh, do you want to just walk in there, get in there?
so sorry, if officers could just clarify the use of the room.
It's been used for some interviews during COVID because it's provided, because of the space that's available in there, it's enabled social distancing. But I think going forward, there's some interest potentially in youth groups meeting there, or enhancing its availability to more of a sort of community youth meeting facility, amongst other considerations. I think that's kind of one of the things that we're looking to take forward. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to any other further thoughts on that.
No, really. I think we recognise that the space is there and that it needs to be much better used. And clearly, what we'll do is bring that into wider discussions around the use of the site going forward. But within the limitations that it's not DDA, you know, and that it does have limitations within its context. So yes, we know it's there and we will look at it, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those answers. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that DWP are moving into Maylords. Does this mean that they're moving out of Blue School Street?
Again, so Andy's been involved in this acquisition with DWP, which I am so thrilled about. And the reason why I'm thrilled about it is that the way in which we can provide units to community organisations at lower rent. So the service charge, really important. The service charge has to be paid by any organisation that's in there. It's the rents that we can possibly play about with if we have enough people paying full market value for their rent and for their rates. So because we've got DWP and they've committed to us and they've done about £1 million works to the area, we've got guaranteed income from them, which allows us to offer reduced rates to first time businesses, to startups, to community groups, for arts groups, to be able to have it at a lower rent. So Andy, do you want to just give a brief understanding about DWP and their place in Maylords?
Yes, certainly. I mean, that was clearly a question that we asked DWP when they approached us about the unit at Maylords, that we weren't really, moving one tenant out and another one in, so to speak. So no, they are committed under the terms of a lease to Blue School House, and the operation that they will have in Maylord will be different. So yeah, we were absolutely sort of clear that we had to bottom that one out, but before we agreed to the tenancy.
Yes.
So in terms of rents, are the rents in Maylords up to date? And if not, what are we doing to recover any money that's outstanding?
Andy's, oh, I thought he was frozen, but he wasn't. Andy will be able to give more of a breakdown on that. And I think, Andy, it would be really helpful to give the national picture that you've been able to explain to me as well.
Yes, certainly. I mean, clearly it's been a very difficult time for retail and commercial property nationally during the pandemic. Overall, our position in terms of the rent recovery from the Maylord Centre is good. Clearly, there are rent arrears, But you know, we have a statement from the end of August, so we know what the rent position is. But in general, the rent recovery compared with other centres nationally is better. And I say that yet again, that's anecdotal evidence, information we've had from our managing agents who manage centres across the UK, who've basically said to us, we are doing better than a lot of other centres nationally. I can't provide the specific percentages offhand, but the information we have is that it's performing better, as I say, than a lot of national centres.
Sorry, one more question. So can you confirm that the cabinet member that Maylords isn't costing us money? So we're bringing in revenue from this site. It's not costing taxpayers money.
I will probably defer over to Andrew Lovegrove with the finance, but the reason, and this was the really difficult thing to get across, was that the purchase of Maylords was not to say we're buying a shopping centre to make this massive profit. What we're saying is we want to transform a key part of the city centre that was in a state of decline. And we do that by offering rents based on different value for money, i.e. social value. So I think what I will do is defer over to Andrew to give that financial position, but having the context that we're not expecting to make a massive profit. And you'll hear this, if anybody's listening, you'll hear this expression Andrew used all the time, that it washes its face financially. And that's the one that we need to have in our mind. So Andrew, can I pass over to you, please? Andrew Lovegrove.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I can confirm, and when we bought it and ongoing moving forward, the centre, the rents collected more than covered the running costs. And if you look at the original decision we took when we acquired it, any surplus, which there is surplus coming through, is set to one side to fund any further costs that we may incur on the site. So it is cash positive, to use the term we've used.
Thank you.
Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. Can I widen the debate, Councillor Davis, because I'm anxious to see what's going to happen as a knock-on effect of acquiring this centre, because we are where we are. We've got to accept that as a committee. And I'm anxious, given that we are where we are, that we do actually make strategic decisions around this centre now, and we utilise the fact we've got it to make better use of our other buildings. And I'd be anxious, and I would seek assurance that we're going to do that. The first one being the library cum museum in Broad Street. I'd like to know that, having made this acquisition, that we are going to be looking very, very carefully at the knock-on effects for our other buildings and actually what we can do with them rather than just focusing on the centre. I'd like some update on that, please, Councillor Davis.
Yes, in short terms, absolutely. Every decision that we have, we need to think about those unintended consequences. So the removal of the library from King Street, Broad Street, sorry, from Broad Street, what knock-on effect does that have with footfall? But then we're looking at putting the museum in. So every single decision that we make has to go via this new Maylord strategy that is due to come to us, I think, Sarah, isn't it? Next month. It's quite soon. What I'm very happy to do is to involve scrutiny in that process, to look at what that is moving forward, so that it starts setting an example for acquisitions that we're doing in the future, that we've got our strategy, we've got our short, medium and long-term strategy, and that we're holding ourselves to account via that strategy each time we make that decision. Does that answer it for you, Louis? Councillor Stark.
Having had to make the decision very urgently, I'm very conscious we are where we are.
Yeah.
Now we've got it, let's make the best use of it in terms of overall asset approach within Hereford.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a lost opportunity there. A lost cause. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Decker.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions, Chairman, but going back on what Councillor Stark was saying, it was mentioned there that the move of the library up to Maydorps and the putting in of our museum, that it's called there the Maydorps project.
Chair, sorry, we can't hear Councillor Durkin. I don't know if anyone else is struggling. I can't hear what you said.
I'll try to get closer.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was just referring back to what Councillor Stark said about when you mentioned moving the library up to Maylords, and you mentioned it as being the Maylords project. If you're moving something and installing a museum down in Broad Street, should this not be the Herefordshire City project overall, rather than just the two sites? Just a question. I've got others I'll come back to.
Okay, I don't really understand the question. It might whether I've missed it. The two projects are two separate projects under the Stronger Towns Board, of which we've submitted. So it's part of the overall TIP, so the Town Investment Plan for Hereford City. So they are all separate projects, but they're put into one overall plan. So in order for us to do the museum project, we must move the library to somewhere else. So we have decided that actually the best, and in fact it was before we'd even thought about doing a museum, I said actually the library would be brilliant in Maylords. So that's how that's developed. But the Maylords project is slightly wider than just the library. So it also encompasses another two projects, one from Powerhouse and the other one from Rural Media. So it is that's the area that the Town Investment Plan is covering. Does that make sense?
It does, but I was referring back to what you said, and your remarks related to the library going into Maylords was the Maylords project. And my point was, and I think you covered it now, was that I'm glad to hear it's a city-wide, because when you start looking at Broad Street Museum and Maylords, there's a whole raft of shops and retail premises in between those two locations. And I'm pleased to hear that all these properties, these businesses, are being considered along with the library moving into Maylords and the museum being put into Broad Street.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Durkin. And it doesn't even just cover to cover Hereford City. It will also, one of the projects is regarding Southside. So it goes as far up as Newton Farm, where they're doing a couple of projects up there as well. So Grow Local, Enmite, and the Southside project. So it covers it and everything has that knock-on effect. Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Durkin, another question. Thank you. I've got another question. It says in the report on item 8, it talks about the longer term approach. My question is, it's been a management contractor, forgive the term, in there since for over a year, nearly a year and a half. I haven't seen any figures related to how much that's costing. And then moving over to Hoople, taking over operational management. Two questions there. I'm sorry about this, but they're all related. Is one, have we reduced the overall cost of operating the centre by going to Hoople? And what expertise in management experience has Hoople got to run a shopping centre?
So there you are, Councillor Davis. You preempted that there would be a question about Hoople and the management. So there you are.
Yep, I thought there might be. So that's good. And it's the right question to ask. Yeah, some of the queries, some of the complaints that I'd had from people that had moved to Maylords was that they felt that there was a real lack of local presence, and that the lack of local presence meant that we weren't able to react quickly to owners' needs or when somebody was interested in units. They also said that seeing as this is to do with social value, where is that local connection? And it's a thing that, I was banging on about from the very beginning. So we've been looking at different ways in which to provide the correct level of somebody managing a centre, rather than it just being a shopping centre, a centre that has a number of different units, and how that can be managed properly. Now, Hoople, as you know, collect our business rates. They've already got the system set up in order for them to be able to collect rates, to be able to effectively give out information as rateable values, etc., etc. So we already had that. What we didn't have in Hoople was a centre manager, and I'll have it confirmed, but we went out for advert for it, and I believe there were interviews last week, and we have been able to get the centre manager employed via Hoople, and they will be the key point of contact for absolutely everybody in Maylords, but also a key contact to work with the old market, to work with Hereford City Council, to work with Hereford Bid, in order to create a buzz about Hereford City again, but to make sure that they're all joined up, rather than having an event on the old market whilst they're having an event in Hightown, and we have competing demands for people's attention. We don't want that. It's not good for anybody. Actually, what we need to do is be able to put that all into one specific programme for Hereford City. And that's what they've done. They'll also control a management suite that is based at Maylords. So it's not just one centre manager. There will be people underneath that manager who are able to do different tasks and work really locally. Really worth saying, Dave, Councillor Hitchner, the leader, and I had meetings with specialists in how centres were run. So not running them as a shopping centre, running them as something different. And they said the absolute key to this is making sure that you have a local management suite. And that was the first thing now that we have been able to do by taking it back in-house. And I do in-house with the inverted commas because it's Hoople. But it allows us to be able to have control over that and also to be able to have that local management insight as well. I don't know whether it's worthwhile Andy or Sarah being able to give any more on that about the difference between Hoople and the Montague Evans, etc. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think the only thing to add, Councillor, and I'll bring Andy in afterwards because he looked at the procurement, because I think one of the questions was how do we know it's good value? So I think Andy just covered that bit off. Is that, of course, Montague Evans are national retail centre managers. That's what they do, but they manage it for profit because that's how you normally manage a shopping centre. What we want is something slightly different. And of course, what we weren't able to do was give them that direction prior to now. So we're in a handover process. We're assessing the data. We're doing a handover, mobilisation, demobilisation process. And we need to, between us, manage it better and manage it in the way that we want to going forward. So I think that's all that I can add on that. But Andy did a procurement exercise sort of beginning to middle part of the year, and Hoople were able to demonstrate, I believe, that they were able to manage the centre cheaper. So Andy, do you want to add something on that?
Yes, just to add, yeah, we did undertake a soft marketing exercise, and we went out to nationally to consultancies and shopping centre managers, and they provided cost estimates back to us. So we were kind of able to look at Hoople and as you said, Sarah, demonstrate that Hoople are providing economy in terms of the management.
Yeah, and also, of course, because they already do a lot of our finance, invoice raising and debt recovery along with legal, it actually made more sense that they could just slot in and just fill the gaps. So that is an efficiency in reality. Although we'll pay for the service through the charges, it actually makes the service more streamlined.
Okay, thank you for those answers, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you. Really, really pleased that we're going to have some joined up working and that we're going to have a local management suite. I think that's fantastic. Just a query on the new manager, the centre manager. I take it this person has experience and a proven track record, so we can rely on the fact that they know what they're doing.
Could I hand over to Andy because I wasn't on the interview panel?
Yeah, the preferred candidate, if I could call her that. Yeah, she's got a proven track record in retail management, commercial management, etc. There is indeed some support that we will provide, I would say, in helping her get her feet under the table, so to speak. You know, within property services itself, we're a very small team. We do have some expertise of shopping centre management from when you know, colleagues were involved in the private sector. So we are able to offer that kind of support internally, if you like.
Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chair. I've got all the questions. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think going on from that, this person that was successful, were they part of a competitive tendering, in inverted commas, process? And what I was still struggling with my first question was the cost of the on-costs of managing such a centre. I think, like Councillor Bowes, I'm delighted to hear, you know, working with BIT, etc. It's good. But can the Hoople contract now demonstrate value for money for like or even better service with this new setup? Because we've got the old management service. Are we able to demonstrate that there's been a saving for people in Herefordshire?
Any officer able to answer that question?
My apologies, Chair, but I'm really sorry, Councillor, but it's quite difficult to understand on the feedback. But I believe you were asking still about value for money with the costs of Hoople going forward, and we believe that yes, we will be able to prove value for money, but until we get there, clearly we can't evidence any direct figures because there will be some mobilisation costs. And I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
The first part was the person who was successful. Was it part of an open interview process where the best person got the job, or was it somebody within Hoople who stepped up and they were given the role because they did the job?
Right, thank you, Councillor, for confirming that. No, it was a competitive process. We had actually a really good response. Hoople had a good response. I was just kept in the loop, and several candidates weren't interviewed, but the ones who had relevant experience were. I think there was about 5, wasn't there, Andy? So I think there was about 5.
There was a short list of 5 and 4 were interviewed because 1 dropped out.
Okay, right. I'm conscious of the time. But we've been talking some time around this issue. Do we have recommendations that we'd just like to review at this stage? Councillor Stark.
I've listened to the debate, and thanks very much for it. I'm still conscious that I'm not clear that the decision when it was taken had allowed for all the consequences of what might happen, including, as you say, Councillor Durkin, where we might have to go with the management of the centre, with the unknowns around the actual occupation of the units, how it fitted in with everything else. And so I think there is a recommendation there, Chair, that when we take decisions like this, even though they may be taken out of time for good reason because the opportunity arises, that they are taken with as much full knowledge as possible of what the downstream consequences are going to be of taking the decision. And I don't feel in this case that we were aware of what those downstream consequences would be. We may have got there by luck rather than design, but I'm still conscious of the fact that this decision was taken without that full hand picture being available at the time.
So would the recommendation therefore be, if the council finds itself in a similar position in future, there's a longer checklist to be devised to ensure that all of these future consequences are taken into account?
If they can be, yes. I mean, yes.
Yeah. Would that be a recommendation?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we need to be careful though, because you could add a list infinitum. I think at the point where officers knew the costs, the running costs, and what was to be expected in terms of revenue and things, and potentially what stronger bids were going through. So I think let's not make lists for lists' sake. Yes, do it with as much information as you can at that stage, but don't let that preclude us. don't let that stop us from making a decision that is the interests of Herefordshire residents could be better. So let's not just make a long list of we've got to check this, 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 and this, because all of that information might not be available. We've just got to check what we can and the best information available at that time.
Well, rather than create a very long list, would it not be to say something like, such decisions, does it fit in with the overall strategy that, or direction that the council wants to go in? And so future-proof a decision by checking it against that.
Yeah.
Councillor Stark.
But there's some obvious consequences here. I mean, I accept Councillor Bowles' point about not having a list for list's sake, but you do have knock-on consequences you know about. You do have downstream revenue costs you know about, because that's part of the decision-making that goes on all the time. It just seems to me that in this particular case, we took a chance. Yeah. Perhaps we're right to take a chance, but I still feel we took a chance, and it may be that it will come out right, but at the time, we couldn't be sure that this was the right decision to take, including spending the 4.5 million a year. And I just think if we miss that point as a scrutiny committee, we're just not doing our job, Chair.
Well, I think we should make a recommendation based on that. Yeah. Mindful of Councillor Bowes' point, you can't have an infinite list of things, because if you haven't got an infinite list, you'd be forever ticking it off. You'd never make a decision. But the point is, there has to be some key considerations, and of course, on that list for me would be what's the return, what's the immediate return, so that you're not making a loss and making the acquisition, that type of thing. Yeah, and so that list of and I mean, if anybody wants to on the committee in that recommendation say specifically what those concerns should be, now's the time to do it.
I would just say, Chair, that we have to make sure that we don't just compare it to a monetary return, because this is not about monetary, this is about what are we giving to the city and the residents. So not just look at it in monetary terms, but look at it in terms of what we're wanting to achieve.
Councillor Decker.
I think Councillor Butt is not just the city people, it's people of Herefordshire.
Yeah.
And I think the term I'm going to use now, probably inappropriate, but I think we'll give a good guideline, was a proper business case made. Yeah, social and economic. Yeah, we'll be better informed on it, perhaps what Councillor Stark was saying. I've got a question, if I may, Chairman. Item number 11, which talks about the town investment plan. I wonder if the Conservative government hadn't given £22.4 million as part of this, what was the projected outlook for Hereford and this project before that £22 million came along? Was there a strategy before the £24 million windfall?
Councillor Davis.
Yes. We would have had more of the opportunities that we're putting forward, so more space for community groups. So it just so happens that we've got 2 people coming forward with the Stronger Towns project, but actually we could have looked at completely different options as well. So there was, as I said, there was a short, a medium and a long-term strategy. Thank God we've made it through COVID and we haven't got that deficit that a number of other city centre people have got. I just want to go back on just one thing though. It makes it sound like it was a punt buying the Mail or Dorchester shopping centre. It wasn't. And it may be really helpful from an Andrew Lovegrove perspective to explain what barriers you have to do in order to purchase such a property. Now, Andrew Lovegrove is our Section 151 officer, for anybody that might be watching, and he is the person that determines whether or not something is valued, whether or not financially we're making the right decisions. What I do understand from Councillor Stark, and I don't want that bit to be missed, is how that affects the overall plans, and I think for me that's the important point there. But I just don't want to leave some things out into the air, whereby it looks like it was just we'll take a guess on this. So Andrew, could I get you to just confirm what processes we had to go to with this?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor. I'm very happy to do that. and with any acquisition of property that the council undertakes, we need to understand why we need it, what we use it for. We rely upon third-party experts to provide an assurance that the asset is in good order and the valuation is reasonable. So we went through all of those processes to acquire the site. As we've just discussed, part of that process to assess whether this is going to be an immediate or forthcoming drain on the council's revenue budget as well as its capital budget. And as I've said before, it's very clear that the Maylords Orchard isn't a drain on the revenue budget. It is paying its way, I think is the phrase we used on there. So that test was quite easily passed. The other question is, why are we acquiring it? Is it an investment asset where you look at the rate of return and those type of things? And I think, as we've just been discussing, the reason for the acquisition wasn't a traditional investment. It was about the economic recovery and leading to changes within the city centre and the retail offer and what happens with what is 4 acres of our city centre. So I was very comfortable that it's an appropriate use of council money.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Starr.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to go back to what I was talking about before about the cultural side of it. I was just wondering, have we started to make provision for when you can book artists, stroke performers and people that are going to be coming in to revitalise our city centre? Are there plans to have a sort of a dedicated changing room, green room area for performers and artists? Because over the years, I've changed in quite a few toilets, and I can tell you that if you're booked to perform and do a good performance somewhere, if you've got a nice room to change in and a mirror on the wall and a chair and a table, it makes a huge difference. And it's amazing how many shopping centres I've been to where they suddenly go, oh, you've got to put a costume on. Well, there's a disabled toilet there, go in there. So are there plans for that? Because I can tell you that on the back, when performers are talking to each other and they say, oh, would you like to go there? And somebody goes, well, they really looked after us. It was really good. All right, it was a couple of £100 less than we normally get to perform, but it really was a good experience. And that encourages people to do a good performance and to come. So this isn't, in the greater scheme of things, I know maybe as important as how much it's cost to set up, but I think it's really important that we make sure there is an area put aside for that sort of stuff. Thank you.
Well, there you are, Councillor Davis, a plea from Councillor Wilding to accommodate his comrades when it comes to performing, and he speaks from experience about having to use facilities that are substandard. So, Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand that the decision to purchase was carried out in March or June of 2020, and yet the report of viability is dated June 2020. What was relied upon to make sure that the project was going to be successful before Montague Evans' report came in?
If I can ask, is Andrew Lovegrove still here? He's not, is he? He's just dropped out. I think the easy question is, the decision had to be made that we could go into negotiations and to put a price on that negotiation. That's why the valuation report is later, and why some of the documentation is later. So the decision to buy was earlier because we had to enter into negotiations, I believe. But can I ask that Andrew Lovegrove gives a written confirmation to the committee on that?
I will be obliged for that, but my question was, what information was relied upon to make this informed decision before the Montague Evans report was actually delivered in June? And when was the report commissioned to be delivered?
I'll get a written response to that, Councillor Durkin. I can't answer that question at this moment in time.
Thank you very much. To all members, please.
Okay,
Of course, of course.
Okay, thank you. We've got Councillor Hitchin who wants to come in, but before we do, Councillor Stark, you wanted to make.
Well, I'm still trying to tease out this recommendation, put it to bed. Perhaps what I'm saying is, we took this decision. We've already said we didn't have the expertise in-house to manage a shopping centre, or even for the oversight of managing a shopping centre. So in a way, it's about the risks that we identified. And did we identify those risks when we took the decision, and were those risks then managed and mitigated in the proper manner? Because one of the risks you would have identified by taking on this lease is that you would have had this operational responsibility to manage a shopping centre. And now we've got to the place where we've got to with Huco. I would like that to have been a formative decision rather than informal, a formal decision where you had a risk register. The risk register said, here's an issue for us coming out of this decision, and this is how we're going to mitigate it. In this case, finding someone who will be able to operate the centre at a lower cost, for example. And that's just one of the issues around this decision.
Genius of my comment just recently about the information available to make a decision from non-professionals, inverted commas, before the actual report had come out, which is we're going to get a written response, but I would attach that to Councillor Stark's concerns as well.
Okay.
Can I just come in? Sorry, Chair. Can I just ask? It's not taking away the point that you've just made, but it's really important here. There were people working in that centre when we took the centre on. So we had centre managers, we had people working in there that 2P'd across. So I'm not sure where that's been lost along the way, but we had expertise in that area. We took on Montague Evans as our managing agent to be able to manage the leases, to be able to garner interest in the centre. And it's over the last 12 months, as one would expect, it was always a stopgap with regards to Montague Evans. As we've been able to understand the centre and where the direction's heading, and the Stronger Towns bid as well, of course, as a part of it, that is now why we have been able to say for us and from the people that we get that lease our units, the most important thing is having a localised centre manager with a number of individuals underneath. We only had people for like 1 or 2 days a week. And that was what was the case previously with Maylord Orchards. We said, we need somebody there 6 days a week. That's how serious we have to take this, is 6 days a week. So I don't want that to be left in the air that we took it on and there was no personnel. There absolutely were.
I'm sorry, I don't think anybody's making that point. I think it was when making a decision to purchase the centre, were all of the issues about the requirements of running the centre fully taken on board from the outset. So, you know, if the expectation was that you would use Montague Evans, well, obviously that was the case. But I don't think the members are making the point that there was a gap. It was there a proper assessment of the full ramifications of what responsibilities were being taken on board? Anyway, can we just go to
Chairman? Can I pass?
Yes,
could I deal with?
Yes, I'm coming to you, Councillor Hitchin. Yes, if we can go over to you.
Yeah. There was no risk whatsoever about managing the shopping centre. When we acquired it, we didn't need to evaluate the risk because there was an existing management arrangement. People falling over themselves probably around the country who would love to manage it. So why should it be considered a risk? It was not a risk. To ask us to put it on a risk register when there's no risk is to my mind absolutely pointless. I just wanted to make some general points, if I may. I'm pleased that this administration is standing here accountable for taking on this asset. We could have been heavily criticised for doing the opposite, which was not to do the deal, to be so slow, to take advantage. We had this extraordinary opportunity to control a building in the centre of our city. And had we not gone ahead with it, I would have been ashamed. There being questions asked about the Stronger Towns Fund. They were not even in our eyesight at the time. This acquisition had no had no fallback with the Stronger Towns Fund. And had we not bought this, had we not been so successful with the Stronger Towns Fund, we would have made different plans, which would have worked. The interesting thing is that by acquiring this site, we have been able to work so closely with the Stronger Towns Fund without having a third party who is looking for profit and would have made as much as they possibly could out of the Stronger Towns Fund. As it is, we can work really closely, incredibly flexibly for the benefit of the city and the county. And I'm enormously proud of that. The speed of decision making, we had to make a really rapid decision. We were given a timeline. Yes, it would have been lovely to have had a great long document explaining why we should do this, but we did not have the time to do that. We discussed it. We tossed around ideas, and we worked very closely with the Section 151 officer to make sure that this was a sound decision. We had to make it quickly. I think it proves that the councils can make decisions quickly with these things. And as I say, I'm enormously proud of making this decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hitchin. Thank you for that. Right, I'd like to focus on any recommendations that this committee wants to make. Have we got any comments about recommendations?
What we've got at the moment, Chairman.
Yeah, I won't put it on the screen because I know it needs work, but roughly at the moment we have, if the council finds itself in a similar position to acquire a strategic asset in the future, it is informed by and assessed against the future property asset management strategy and associated risk registers.
Yeah. Can I just add, Councillor Hitchner didn't quite get the point that I was making. It wasn't the fact we had existing management centre expertise in the centre. It's just that we're not good at the oversight of those sort of technical teams. That was the point, contract management or HR management, that's the point I'm trying to make. So when it comes to the risk register, that is still a risk that we are taking on a team that wasn't part of the council before. That was the risk I was saying. So when it comes to your recommendation that you just read out, John, I would still want the risk register to be in there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a second recommendation, which I think is implicit by the first, but I'll read it out anyway, that future acquisitions are supported by a full business case to underpin any future purchases.
Yeah, that's what we're getting at, isn't it?
Yeah. Happy with that, everyone?
And I think that's a difference from what you were saying.
Yeah.
It's about showing them, it's about showing due diligence is being done as well as being done. Yeah.
Can I just come back? I think obviously we did do due diligence because that's what the Section 151 obviously checks, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to go ahead. But I just want to make sure we're not making work for the sake of, so that we can prove that as a council we can respond quickly. Yes, we have to look at the decisions on both sides, but we have to be able to react quickly to make decisions. That's what happens in business. You look at the pros and you look at the cons and you do an informed decision. But what we don't want to be able to do is stop stifling people by saying you can't make decisions. You've got to have it informed. But my other recommendation would be around next month. There's a strategy, the small, medium and long-term strategy for Maynooth. I think I heard Sarah say. And I think that should be communicated to all members so that everybody gets a copy of it and knows what's happening.
Okay. Another recommendation, and then Councillor Stark.
How does this fit with our treasury management strategy?
We've still got Councillor Andrew Lovegrove. No. So can we just clarify? Yeah, we need a question, an answer to that question, if we may. But any more recommendations that this committee would like to put forward?
Are we going to get a response, Chairman? I didn't get here agreement to a response to that question.
Well, we'll have it noted in the minutes that the committee would require an answer to Councillor Stark's specific question about treasury management. Do we have any more recommendations?
Chair?
Yes.
I don't really know if this is a recommendation because I keep on banging on about the cultural, the artistic side of it. And there's a lot of, talk of recommendations in terms of how much it costs and whether it's making money, etc. I'd like some kind of recommendation that we make sure there is someone who understands about art and culture and creating the right type of that sort of input that's managing the centre. So, it's not a shopping centre. We don't want it to be a shopping centre. We want it to be a cultural, artistic hub type centre. So is there input in that way to make sure it's being driven in that direction as well?
Could that be included as part of the business case?
No, I think it's a separate point. It's about making sure that, I think, Councillor Wilding, it would perhaps be advisable to say other uses that are complementary to the retail element, because you don't want to get rid of the retail element that's making it wash its face. So just to say that any facilities that promote the arts are provided in a way that's conducive to them operating. Something like that.
I think that's quite right. I mean, we're talking about shop windows and art in there and stuff. It's important that someone who understands that sort of stuff oversees it.
Suitably skilled to ensure that the arts agenda is suitably accommodated. Councillor Stark.
I mean, this is at the heart of the questions we've been trying to ask today about, we had this broad vision, but have we looked at all the consequences? Because what Councillor Wilding's just struck a chord with me is the decision to have Hoople operate in this centre. Is that the right decision, given that you want this centre to be looked at not just as a shopping centre, but as a repurposed centre, which includes the cultural side and the art side? And this goes back to my point about, have we been taking these decisions with that fully in mind? And exactly what you've just said throws back, in my mind, have we taken the right decision in employing Hoople?
My feeling there is that employing Hoople was a good move because they are not specifically managing a shopping centre. They're a media type thing. They understand the media aspects of it. So there might be others that could do it, but I think it was in the right direction.
Is that established? Is that an established fact that they use facilities that you want?
Could we, but
I have no idea. That's why I was asking.
When you acquire, so take on a company or an asset, you look to identify that's an area that I need to employ someone with the relevant experience in, and then have that on your risk register and employ someone. There's nothing to say that Hoople couldn't employ someone with those exact skills that we need. So all we're doing is highlighting, yes, we need someone with those skills to be employed by Hoople, to make sure that all the bases are covered, as well as the shopping centre experience that the candidate has. Then we need someone else who's got the arts experience.
And have we got it?
Yeah, so I think enough's been said to encapsulate that recommendation. Okay. Right. Any other recommendations?
Well, the only point is, have we got the expertise in hand now to drive this centre forward against the vision that Councillor Davis has said she wants to have for it?
Okay, well, direct question to Councillor Davis.
Yes. And to come back on that with the recommendation, a bit of help with that one, is that what might be really good as a recommendation is that we include the cultural partnership as part of our our long-term strategy for Maylord Orchards, is that we include the cultural partnership for Herefordshire in that. Now, that is driven by the arts across the whole of Herefordshire, and it is an outstanding strategy and group that work. And when I went to the LGA for my cultural cabinet lead training, when I first started, people were nearly ripping the cultural strategy out of my hand because it's seen as best practice. So I think it would be really good, rather than us going to individuals who dictate their specific needs. Actually, we're including all dimensions of the arts under the cultural partnership. So I think that that would be a really helpful recommendation.
Okay, so we'll add that as a recommendation. Okay. Any more recommendations? So we just have a summary of those recommendations, and then I think we'll put them to the vote.
Just one minute. What? No. So I've emailed you. Well, have you? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so recommendations as currently written. So the first recommendation is, if the council finds itself in a similar position to acquire a strategic asset in the future, it is informed by and assessed against a future property asset management strategy and associated risk register. That future acquisitions are supported by a full business case to underpin any future purchases. The short, medium and long-term strategy for Maylord Orchards is shared with all members. And that future managers are suitably skilled and management decisions are suitably informed by the cultural partnership to ensure that arts and culture are placed to an equally prominent footing to the economic recovery objectives.
So, is everyone happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, if there are no further recommendations, then put that to the vote. All in favour? Proposed and seconded from the chair. Proposed by the chair and seconded by the chair. Vice Chair. Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank you to councillors, Councillor Hitchener and Councillor Davis in particular, and to officers for contributing. And the next item on the agenda is the work programme, which I recommend that we just note. Yeah. And have further discussion on that as needs be at the next meeting. And just to conclude by saying thank you to officers and for committee for all of your comments and contributions, to all of those who participated in today's meeting. Thank you for that. And can I just confirm that the live stream is now closed?